Hey guys, how are you all? Welcome back to my channel. Today we will see what if female Naruto has Kushina temper. If you enjoy then please like, share and do comments. A handsome man, around 20 years old, sat in front of a huge desk that had piles of paperwork stacked up on top of it. This man had spiky blonde hair that reached the very tips of his shoulder blades with two long bangs coming down on either side of his angular face. Bright blue eyes, like sapphires, constantly flicked from the papers in front of him to the clock mounted on the wall. Every now and then his leg would spasm slightly and would kick out, much to his great embarrassment and frustration. It wasn't really his fault, however. This man was Minato Namikaze, the newly appointed Yondaime Hokage, and highly skilled ninja weren't used to just sitting around doing nothing. It was his first week in the office and to be brutally honest, it sucked. Minato had been expecting there to be excitement and all sorts to be required of the strongest ninja in the village, not his approval on the most menial things possible. Who would have thought that it would need the Hokage's approval to assign a mission to a bunch of 12-year-olds to paint a fence? Surely someone else could do this. That was going to be the first thing on his list. Find some unsuspecting chunin and make them hand out missions. Maybe not the higher ranked ones, but definitely these ones. Another glance at the clock showed only 3 minutes had passed since his last check, causing Minato to sigh. He was supposed to be having lunch with his fiancée at 1 and it couldn't come quick enough. His fiancée was a beautiful kunoichi, with waist-length red hair and sparkling violet eyes. She was a couple of years younger than him, only 18, but was easily one of his most powerful shinobi. She was also known as the red hot-blooded habanero for her temper. Kushina Uzumaki her name was. They had met in the academy and after a bit of trouble with Kumo Shinobi, they had been close ever since. When he was 16, he finally drew up enough courage to ask her out and she accepted. Then, 3 more years later, he asked her to marry him. Thank God she accepted once more and they were due to get married in a couple of months from today. Whilst some may say that getting married at 20 is young, shinobi have dangerous and short lives usually and they must take advantage of every good thing they have, otherwise they could miss their chance. Kushina had just gotten back from an extended mission protecting the fire daimyo's daughter-in-law's mother for several weeks and they had immediately made plans to see each other. Whilst it wasn't a particularly dangerous mission, it was long and he missed her greatly. Finally the clock ticked over to 1 o'clock and Minato stood up with a groan. His legs had gone to sleep from being inactive for so long, causing pins and needles to shoot through them for several moments until settling back down. His door opened and his middle-aged secretary popped her head in. "Hokage-sama, where are you going?" she demanded overly sweetly. She had smile plastered on her face that made the Yondaime swallow nervously. "I have a very important lunch appointment," he replied. "I don't have anything booked in." Minato slowly inched towards the window, the only available escape route. "Yes, I was going to tell you about it but forgot." He rubbed the back of his head with his hand before giving her a quick salute. "See ya round then." And with that he leapt out the window and crossed several rooftops in a matter of seconds, leaving his annoyed secretary to frown and mutter curses about a certain blonde-haired ninja. When Minato arrived at their agreed lunch spot, a tiny ramen stand called Ichiraku's, the first thing his eyes were drawn to was the beautiful woman sitting there waiting for him. There was bags under her eyes, testament to her mission, but other than that her face radiated love and contentment. Minato was by her side in a split second and she was in his arms a moment later. Wisps of her hair tickled his nose lightly and he inhaled her unique scent, a mixture of rose and citrus. They broke apart slightly to stare into one another's eyes, silently reassuring each other that they were there, all right, once more. A slight chuckle broke the couple apart with bright red faces and they turned to see Hiruzen Sarutobi, the Sandaime Hokage, smiling at them from the booth. "Not even a week in and you're already shirking work to come see your fiancé," he teased. "Not off to the best start there." Minato smiled sheepishly but wrapped an arm around his girl's waist. "I told you when I took this job that she comes first. And when I have kids one day in the future, they'll come first as well." Shinobi are trained to react to the slightest thing, whether it's the twitch of an eye that indicates they're uncomfortable, or the snap of a twig, or even body language. All these things are what keep shinobi alive in the field. As Minato was a shinobi, there was no way he missed the tensing of Kushina's shoulders when he mentioned kids. A feeling of nervousness grew in his stomach and the edge of his smile slipped slightly. Not wanting to draw attention to it, he pulled Kushina to the booths and they quickly ordered mass amounts of ramen for the both of them. It was a sort of tradition. Whenever they hadn't seen each other for a while, they would reunite over bulk ramen. They talked with Hiruzen for a while before he excused himself and left the two alone. Instead of the conversation flowing, however, it stopped almost completely and Minato could tell something was bothering her. "Kushina?" he asked quietly, placing his hand over hers. There were a multitude of scars on her hands, obvious signs of someone who fights for a living. "What's wrong? You can tell me." She refused to look at him for a second before turning to face him directly. A range of emotions were clear in her eyes, from worry to happiness and sadness and anger and fear among others, all mixed together, and Minato found himself dreading what she had to say. It was hard to believe that not 5 minutes earlier they had been laughing and joking around happily. "Minato," she said quietly, "something happened while I was on the mission." A million possibilities ran through his mind of what it could be, some worse than others. He nodded for her to continue, joining her in taking a deep breath first. "However, we were in a skirmish with some mercenaries, nothing too troublesome, but I got overconfident and got my arm cut up by a stray kunai. It wasn't a bad cut and after the fight we got it healed up, but the medic Nin discovered something." She paused for a second. "I'm pregnant, Minato." For a moment there was absolute silence. And then the sound of a certain blonde shinobi hitting the floor in a dead faint. Roughly 7 months later, a blood-curdling scream rang through the peaceful village air, causing many of the citizens, both civilian and shinobi alike, to wince before continuing on with whatever they were doing. Today was a monumental day in Konoha, a day many had been waiting for many months. Today was the day that another shriek ripped through the air, followed shortly by words. "Get this fucking baby out of me right this instant." Yes, today was the day that Kushina Uzumaki gave birth. After Minato's unexpected nap all those months ago, he had quickly convinced Kushina that he was ecstatic about it, and whilst it was sooner than he had expected, he didn't mind at all. They had gotten married just like they had planned, even if her dress did need to be loosened a bit around the stomach. When the time finally came for Kushina to give birth, Minato held nothing back, making sure that she had every bit of protection available. He had a great many enemies who would love to hurt him by targeting his family, and right now she was at her most vulnerable. Not only that, but because of her tenant, extra preparations had to be made to make sure that nothing went wrong. The village really didn't need a several 100-meter tall 9-tailed fox strolling through it anytime soon. He had written extra seals on her during the birth and was constantly monitoring the seal's strength, but unfortunately it required a whole lot of concentration and her screaming wasn't helping. "You asshole!" Kushina bellowed at her husband. "This is all your fault. You just had to go and get me fucking pregnant." Minato nodded and patted her hand while giving her a reassuring smile. "Yes, it's all my fault, honey. Don't fucking patronize me, you bastard." The last word was muffled, however, as it transformed into a scream. Minato gulped and looked towards the medic, who just happened to be Tsunade, the most skilled medic alive and member of the Sannin. They had agreed that the less people who knew their location the better, but wanted the best. Tsunade was the obvious choice. "How much longer?" Tsunade gave him a small smile. "Not long now, another half hour at most." Unfortunately, Kushina heard the last bit. "Another half hour? Are you fucking kidding me? There's no way this baby is a girl, she would never be this fucking stubborn." Tsunade laughed and was about to reply when Kushina suddenly gasped and clutched at her chest, where the seal holding the Kyuubi inside her was located. At the same time Minato felt alarms go off in his seals. "Minato, something's wrong," she gasped out. "Kyuubi is getting out." He gritted his teeth and laid his hands on her chest. Blue chakras swirled around them and symbols appeared, pulsing with red and blue light. Tsunade could see that the red chakra was slowly overtaking the blue, and she knew it wasn't a good sign. The moment the red chakra left a part of the seal, it disappeared. She wasn't an expert on sealing like Jiraiya, Minato or Kushina, but she knew that it wasn't a good sign. Another contraction racked Kushina's body and she faltered a bit, her heart stopping for a second. Her body was undergoing far too much pressure, she wouldn't be able to maintain it for long. "Minato, we need to get the baby out now. She can't handle this for much longer." Minato only grunted in reply but forced more chakra into the seal, forcing the red back a bit. Tsunade took this as confirmation and began to prepare her medical ninjutsu to rush the last stage of birth a bit. Within a couple of minutes, there were results and she could see the head of the baby. "Come on Kushina, you can do this." She heard Minato panting quietly. There was a grave tinge to her face that scared Tsunade a bit and she rushed the birth even more. "One more push," Tsunade told her almost daughter figure. "Just give me one more push." Kushina just nodded and pushed, too exhausted to even scream anymore. She kept the pressure on for as long as she could, and when she finally released, the sound of a bawling baby met her ears. Tsunade quickly dealt with the umbilical cord and cleaned him up a bit, wiping all the fluids off as best as she could. She could still hear Minato panting while trying to suppress the Kyuubi, but it wasn't nearly as labored as before. When she was done cleaning the baby, she brought it to the parents and presented it. The baby had a tuft of blonde hair, the exact color of Minato's, but had Kushina's violet eyes. Its facial features seemed to be evenly divided from both parents, with Minato's angular features and Kushina's slim and slender build, and the skin was lighter than Minato's but darker than Kushina's. "Minato, Kushina," Tsunade stated softly, "let me introduce you to your daughter, Naruto Namikaze." Kushina, despite her near passed out state, managed to reach forward and cradle the baby girl into her side. Naruto had stopped crying and was sleeping peacefully, with the occasional gurgle. Minato on the other hand was staring at the baby in slack-jawed amazement. His hands slipped forward to press against her delicate cheeks. In the next moment red chakra spilled from Kushina's chest in a sudden burst, causing the new mother to arch her back with the force of it. He shouted at Tsunade to take Naruto and get her away. She grabbed the baby girl, who had started crying once more, and ran away from the room. She hated to leave two of her most precious people, but she had no choice. They would never forgive her if something happened to Naruto. The best thing she could do is go get backup as quickly as possible. Minato tried to shove the chakra back into his wife, but it quickly became evident he had no hope of succeeding. Kushina's seal had become too damaged to function properly, and if he drew another one on her in her current state it would kill her. He couldn't seal the Kyuubi inside himself as his body wasn't able to host its enormous chakra now. His pathways had already settled and set a long time ago. His only option was to seal the Kyuubi inside his newborn daughter. Minato's eyes widened in horror and realization as this is what he would have to do. He remembered telling Sarutobi that he would put his family over his Hokage job, but now, when it came down to it, he just couldn't do it. He couldn't let the Kyuubi get free and kill many innocent people when he could have stopped it. Resigning himself to it, Minato drew up a quick chakra suppression seal that should delay the Kyuubi until he could get everything ready. Fortunately, the seal worked and the flow of red chakra slowed somewhat, but he knew that he still didn't have a whole lot of time. With one last look at his unconscious wife, the Yondaime flashed away to his home. He wrote a quick note to Kushina and to Naruto, so that they would have something of him when he died tonight. It was so surreal. He was going to die. He was only 20. Shaking his head sharply, there was no time for depressing thoughts, he had a mission to do. He grabbed a clean scroll and as carefully as he could, wrote out the design for the seal needed. Even the slightest mistake could kill them all. When he was done, Minato rolled it up and flashed back to the cave, careful to leave the two letters on the table for his two girls. When he got back to the cave, however, Minato received a shock. He had expected to have to hunt down his daughter, but there she was, with Sarutobi and Tsunade right beside her. And the most surprising, Sarutobi was nearly done drawing a seal identical to his own on his daughter's chest. "What are you doing?" he asked dumbly. The two elder shinobi looked up at him with sadness but also resignation in their eyes. "I think you know the answer," Tsunade said softly. He completed the last stroke of the brush and the seal gave a pulse for a second before settling back down. It was ready to be activated. The edge of the compression seal he placed on Kushina peeled off and Hiruzen was about to start the process when Minato stopped him. "Wait," he called out, grabbing the S and Aim's arm. "I'm the Hokage, it's my duty to sacrifice everything for the village. I should be doing this." Hiruzen looked at him with age-old eyes, so much experience, so much love and pain held within them that Minato felt like a child in front of his father. "I never expected you to. I may not be the Hokage anymore, but I still have a duty to protect the village, just like any leaf ninja." If my last act of life ensures that you can live out the rest of your life with your wife and daughter, then I will die happy. Grant me this last request, Minato. Live happy. Minato nodded slowly and released his grip on the old monk's arm. Thank you, Hiruzen. I'll make sure that the village knows what happened here tonight. You are the best of us. Sarutobi nodded and exchanged one last glance with Tsunade before turning back to the baby girl. It was obvious that they had spoken before in private and had nothing left to say. Well, almost nothing. I'll miss you, sensei, Tsunade whispered. He didn't reply, but a smile crossed his face as he ripped of the compression seal and he activated the Shiki Fuin seal. Immediately, semi-transparent claw burst through the red chakra swarming out of Kushina's chest, followed by a whole lot more. Sarutobi yelled and blue light burst around in a wave, pushed the red back. A figure arose from the very center, a being that flickered and made you want to look away. No words were needed, as both parties understood what needed to be done, and the cost for it. The being grabbed the claw and dived into the baby. The three conscious people watched in awe as the being disappeared, but appeared to drag the Kyuubi with him. Slowly the rest of the body was dragged out of Kushina and into Naruto. When it was finished, however, the seal twisted into more of a tattoo shape with swirls and flame-like structures all spreading out from the middle, a bit like wings. The being re-emerged from Naruto and turned to Hiruzen, completely ignoring the other two. None of them knew what to expect next, but what they didn't expect is for him to speak. It is done. I have sealed the Kyuubi into this child. Your seal wasn't enough though. I have taken favor upon you for your selflessness and bravery and have modified the seal so that it can contain the full power of the Kyuubi. I require my payment now, however. Its voice was powerful, and it took all Minato's willpower to remain on his feet. Sarutobi nodded and stood tall as the being reached forward and pressed a single finger over his heart. His breathing faltered, and then, in a flash of light, the being disappeared and the Sandaime Hokage collapsed. Tsunade caught him and carefully laid him down. A soft smile was spread on his face in death, and she couldn't stop a tear from falling as she kissed his forehead one last time. It was so quiet after all the drama that it was almost painful. Taking a deep breath, Minato pulled Tsunade to her feet and turned to where Kushina was curled around her daughter. They both slept peacefully. This is what he died for, Minato said softly. This, and the village. Let's not let him down then. Tsunade agreed. Minato was once again seated in his office with mountains of paperwork sitting before him. He sighed as he reflected on the aftermath of the potential disaster that was called Kyuubi. Tsunade had carried Kushina and Naruto while he carried Hiruzen back to the village. There was no way that any person with even a hint of awareness had missed the ominous feeling of malice that the Kyuubi chakra contained, so the whole village was on red alert for the hint of danger. When they approached, they were met by Anbu, who quickly stood down when they realized who they were. Report, Minato ordered. The Anbu stood to attention immediately, recognizing the man in Hokage mode. Hokage-sama, when we felt the aura of the Kyuubi, the Sandaime ordered us to immediately start gathering the civilians to the stadium. When Tsunade-sama arrived, he followed her and we continued on with our job. The aura increased all of a sudden, then disappeared altogether. We did our best to keep the civilians calm, but they're not trained to stand killing intent. There were a couple of casualties made by careless mistakes, but we managed to keep them down. The Anbu finished his report with a bow and Minato nodded in acceptance. Civilians panicked easily and they needed to be kept under tight control in dangerous situations, or otherwise they would make even more trouble. Good job. Tell everyone that they can stand down and gather all the Chunin and Jonin. I have to debrief them and then I have to talk to the civilians tonight. Make sure word gets out that they will know what happened today at 6 in front of the Hokage Tower. The Anbu bowed once more before separating in different directions to spread the word. Minato and Tsunade carried on to his home where they lay Kushina down with Naruto and covered Hiruzen with a sheet. They didn't speak to each other, each mourning in their own ways. Neither of them cried though. Shinobi weren't supposed to show emotion to others after all. They busied themselves by doing little things until an Anbu came to say that all the Jonin and Chunin who could be spared had gathered. He turned to look at his mother figure for a second. Can you take care of them for me? Make sure nothing happens? He asked, worry saturating his tone. Tsunade nodded and the harsh lines carved into her face softened the slightest bit. Of course I will. Nothing will happen to them. He smiled gratefully and pushed off the ground, disappearing in a blur. It didn't take him long to get to where his shinobi were gathered, and was pleased to see that nearly everyone was there. He cleared his throat to quiet down the small chatter going on and performed a quick jutsu to amplify his voice. "Shinobi of Konoha," he began, "today is a sad day for all of us. As all of you by now should know, a massive amount of chakra was released earlier on. Most of you would have recognized it, but for those of you who hadn't, it was the Kyuubi." Several gasps from the younger shinobi met his statement, but they were quickly shushed by the others. While my wife was in childbirth, the Kyuubi managed to damage his seal on her beyond repair. It began to escape its prison when I realized that he would need to be resealed. Kushina couldn't manage it to be resealed in her in the state she was in, and only a newborn baby can have a biju sealed within them so their chakra coils can adjust. The only option was to seal the Kyuubi within my daughter. More exclamations of shock and sadness erupted from the crowd that he had to do that to his own daughter, overshadowing the happiness they felt at their beloved leader having a child. I delayed the Kyuubi to prepare a seal, but when I came back, your Sandiami Hokage had already begun one. He gave his life to seal the Kyuubi back from hurting anyone. We will have a funeral service for him tomorrow, and we will never forget the sacrifice he made to save us all. They stayed there for several minutes in silence, digesting the news that was just placed upon them. When he deemed enough time had passed, Minato continued. My daughter, Naruto Namikaze, also made a sacrifice today. She is a living sacrifice. She is the only thing that is stopping the nine-tailed fox demon from rampaging across our village. She is not the Kyuubi, but its jailer. She is a hero. If anyone has a problem with her, they will have a problem with me, and her mother. Many of the shinobi there gulped and put away any brief ideas of killing her to kill the demon. The look in the eyes of their leader was that of any parent, promising pain and lots of it on anyone who thought of hurting his child. Am I understood? He demanded. Affirmative murmurs met his question and Minato nodded in satisfaction. That should deter any wannabe heroes in the future. I will be addressing the civilian population tonight, but you have all been debriefed first out of my respect for all of you. Jonin senseis, you may tell your genin in private later on, or leave it up to me to do tonight. Please make sure that your comrades who couldn't be here right now find out soon. Thank you. The shinobi of the leaf slowly dispersed, sorrow being the main expression on their faces. They were all grieving for the death of the Sandiami, but none of them shed tears. As the Kyuubi hadn't actually gotten free and killed any of their loved ones, the shinobi had no reason to bear ill will towards Naruto and did indeed see her as a hero for holding it back to protect them all. Later on, when the civilians were told what had transpired that day, many of them would have the exact same views. The next year had gone rather smoothly. After the potential Kyuubi incident had been cleared up, and everyone had done mourning, life had settled back into pretty much the same as it had been before for most people, excluding the Namikaze family. Naruto was a constant ball of energy and she never seemed to stop being hungry. She was also very intelligent, learning to walk and talk much sooner than other babies. She didn't like to sleep much and was very noisy, much to the dismay of Kushina and Minato. Tsunade had returned to the village permanently after Naruto's birth, not wanting to leave the baby she considered her granddaughter. Jiraiya also popped in regularly. After all, the godfather had some responsibilities. Kushina had left active duty as a shinobi to take care of her overly excitable daughter, but despite that, she still needed help taking care of her, which is where Tsunade came in handy. She missed the fighting and action, but found motherhood like a new adventure all the same. Minato's job as Hokage meant that he couldn't be home as much as she would have liked, but he still made time somehow, and it made her smile softly every time she thought about the little things he did to show her that even though he couldn't be with her all the time, she was on his thoughts constantly. For example, he would often send the Anbu off on missions to find rare and exotic flowers that he could give to her. It was sort of like an Anbu hazing thing. All the new recruits got stuck with them while the others went on S-ranked missions. As Naruto got older, passing her 2s and 3s, Kushina tried to keep her as humble as possible. It was hard with the village doting on her, but she managed somehow. Every now and then Naruto would get difficult, but a quick knock on the head from Kushina or Tsunade quickly set her straight again. They had noticed as Naruto got older, that her features had taken on a slightly foxy tint, almost unnoticeable unless you were looking to it. Her canine teeth were slightly larger than normal, much like the Inuzuka clan actually, and her violet eyes would sometimes turn slit-pupilled and almost seem to glow when she got angry. Not only that, but her fingernails and toenails would grow extremely quickly and were very hard and sharp. Even though these things weren't normal, Naruto's parents could only be happy that she didn't have any stupid markings on her, like whisker marks or something. Well, besides the seal that is. Despite their best intentions, neither Minato, Kushina or Jiraiya, Konoha's 3 best seal experts, could find a way to make it disappear. Unlike Kushina's seal, which only appeared if she specifically channeled chakra into that area, Naruto's seal was constantly on display, showing the world that she was different. It resided right in the middle of her chest and when she was older, would sit on the top of and in between her breasts. It had many strange markings and they had deciphered some of them to mean storage and convert, but they couldn't figure anything else beyond that. The seal was simply far beyond their grasp and probably always would be. Nonetheless, it did its job at keeping the Kyuubi back and didn't show any sign of weakening in Naruto's fortnightly checks. It looked a lot like a tattoo actually. Naruto's personality seemed to be almost creepily similar to Kushina's at times, despite her young age. She had a ferocious temper and hated her hair with a passion. Despite all their best tries, it did nothing but spike out and resemble a pineapple. Kushina had grown it out to her waist in an attempt to get it to settle down, but it still refused to remain neat and tidy. Every time someone even mentioned the word pineapple, Naruto would grow a violet-colored aura around her. Her eyes would turn with slit pupils, and a decent amount of killing intent would permeate the air. Quite impressive for a 4-year-old. Those who knew Kushina well would often sweat drop at the resemblance between mother and daughter when this happened and back away slowly. Naruto had also inherited both her parents' love for ramen, and could eat it all day every day if she was allowed to. Thankfully, Tsunade stepped in before her parents could actually allow her to and made the small child eat vegetables and meats. Tsunade swore that if the child was left on her own she wouldn't eat anything else and would probably even do things as crazy as have instant ramen cups for breakfast. The girl was also very outgoing. Kushina had introduced her to the other clan heads' children, as several of them had kids around the same age. Hiashi Hyuga's nephew Neji was the same age as Naruto, and Hiashi himself had a daughter a little over a year younger. Hinata was sweet girl, if a bit shy, but Naruto didn't seem to click with her like she had with Neji. When Neji's father was sacrificed to save Hiashi, it had taken a lot of work for Naruto to remain friends with the boy, as he had stopped talking to nearly everyone. Kushina was pleased to say though that their friendship had continued, even if they didn't see each other as often as before. Another family that the Namakazes were close to were the Uchihas. Itachi was 2 years older than Naruto and he saw her as a younger sister of sorts. Makoto was one of Kushina's best friends and Minato often went to Fugaku with advice about being Hokage. Fugaku had once dreamed of being Hokage himself, but he had developed a sickness of some kind that they couldn't figure out what was wrong. He was slowly dying and they couldn't do anything to stop it. They didn't even know if it was hereditary or not, and only prayed that Itachi and Sasuke, his 3-year-old younger brother, didn't develop it when they were older. The other major clan heads all had sons and daughter ranging from 2 to 5 years old with an exception every now and then. It seemed that once one clan had a child, all the other clans wanted children as well, causing the generations to be very similar in age. The Kyuubi mostly stayed dormant in Naruto, except for one incident a couple of weeks ago. Kushina had been playing with her daughter in the gardens, watching as Naruto chased a butterfly around and around. She had turned around for a minute because she had thought she heard something, but passed it off as nothing after a brief scan. When she had turned back to her daughter, however, Naruto was missing. Kushina had panicked and immediately sent out a chakra pulse, sensing for anything with developed chakra coils in the nearby vicinity. That was how she sensed the figure heading away from this direction at top speed. She had immediately set off in pursuit, following the figure through the outskirts of the village. She finally caught up when she cornered the now revealed male shinobi against the wall of Konoha. The Anbu were waiting for him and when he turned to head the other direction, she stopped him. He had Naruto bound and slung over his shoulder, but she could see her daughter squirming slightly, trying to get free. The man wore no ninja affiliation headband and Kushina guessed he was either undercover or freelancing. Let my daughter go, and maybe you can get out of this with your life." Kushina lied. No one that tried kidnapping her daughter would live to tell about it. The shinobi scoffed and shifted his grip on the girl, moving to pull her in front of his body whilst backing up against the wall even further to protect his back. "Likely story, you would kill me the moment she was safe." Kushina carefully controlled her facial expressions, but her silence was enough. "That's what I thought." The foreign shinobi sighed. He pulled a kunai and before any of them could react, held it to the girl's exposed neck. The Anbu made to attack, but she waved them down. She wouldn't risk her daughter's life so easily. "What is going to happen?" the shinobi said, a smirk on his face. "Is that I am going to walk right over this wall and you lot are going to let me." She opened her mouth but was cut off before she could begin. "If not, then your precious baby here will die." Kushina gulped and nodded. It only took one look for the Anbu to jump down beside her and the shinobi started heading up the wall. Kushina's mind was swirling trying to think of a solution, but she couldn't. She needed Minato to be here, but by the time word could get to him, it would be too late. Naruto just watched in confusion as she was taken away from her mother. She could see the sadness and pain on her mother's face and didn't understand why she couldn't go to her. She tried getting free, but the man holding her wouldn't let her go. He pressed the kunai into her throat harder and it hurt. Naruto cried out, and then suddenly something happened, something no one had expected. Naruto's eyes took on her slit-pupilled appearance, her fingernails grew, and the seal on her chest started glowing bright red. A wave of chakra burst from her, burning the foreign shinobi and causing him to drop her in surprise. Instead of falling onto a heap on the ground like she would normally, however, Naruto dropped the 10 meters and landed in a light crouch. Wisps of red chakras swirled around her to create the vague form of a fox with 9 tails. One of these tails shot out at blinding speeds and grabbed the now retreating shinobi and pulled him to the ground and held him there. Wherever his skin came into contact with the chakra tail, it burnt him easily, turning his skin a bright red. "Why are you taking me away from my mummy?" she demanded. Her voice wasn't the same as before, it was deeper and had the undertones of power. "Why would you do something like that?" As she finished her question, the other tails lashed out at him, whipping at his arms, legs and face. The man cried out, but it only fell on deaf ears. Kushina and the 3 Anbu however watched in growing awe and horror. Kushina knew she had to stop this before it got out of control though. "Baby, you can stop now. Everything's going to be alright," she called out, taking a step forwards. One of the Anbu tried to hold her back, but she shook him off. This was her daughter, not an enemy. Naruto turned to stare at her, and for a moment, there was only fury, no recognition. Then she seemed to realize what she was doing and quickly released the now unconscious and heavily bleeding attempted kidnapper. Then she took several steps backwards before tripping over and landing on her butt. Kushina took another step forward only to be warned away. "Stay away," Naruto screamed, holding out a clawed hand in front of her. "Get back, don't come near me." The red chakra tails separated, 5 to wrap around Naruto protectively and the 4 to shoot out to hover menacingly around her, darting at Kushina whenever she tried to get close. A crowd had started to gather around the edges, but all the arriving shinobi who had sensed the high levels of chakra being released stopped them from getting close. A flash of yellow appeared beside her and Kushina looked to her left to see her husband standing there with a worried look on his face. He must have used the seal on her bracelet to teleport to her location. It only took one glance at the injured foreign shinobi for him to gain a basic understanding of what had happened, and he didn't like it. "Naruto," he said kindly, but sternly. "You need to calm down." She looked up and his heart faltered when he saw tear tracks on her face. Her slit violet eyes still glowed, however, and he could tell she was becoming unstable. "I need to calm down?" she screamed. "Look at what I did. I'm a monster, what is wrong with me?" The 4 tails shot out to lash out at the nearby crowds, causing several screams from the civilians. Minato knew he had to contain this before things got out of hand and people started getting hurt. After analyzing the chakra tails for a moment longer, Minato threw one of his special kunai straight at his daughter's heart. Like he suspected, the tails swatted the kunai, of course, causing it to bury itself into the wall just to the left of where Naruto was huddled. Immediately, he flashed to the kunai and bolted towards his daughter, ducking under 2 tails. He reached her a second before the 3rd tail hit him away, but it was enough time for him to smack a chakra suppression seal on her forehead. As he flew through the air, his shoulder burning where the tail had hit him, he flipped so that he would land on his feet. Minato skidded several feet but stopped in time to see the tail slowly retracting back into Naruto. Her eyes and fingernails returned to normal and she slumped forwards, unconscious before she hit the ground. Silence was thick between the spectators before mutterings of fear started up. The people were worried that she was turning into the Kyuubi, and if so, then maybe she should be taken care of. Kushina, hearing the talk, whirled around to glare at everyone in sight. "Oi!" she bellowed, gathering everyone's attention. Out of the corner of her eyes she saw Minato pick up Naruto and the Anbu take away the would-be kidnapper to the T&I department. To all of you who think that my daughter is the Kyuubi, you have been informed that she is most definitely not. One brave civilian stood out among the crowd and shouted back at her. How to explain what just happened then? That definitely looked like the Kyuubi's power to me. Kushina glared at the man and he took an involuntary step back. The only reason that happened was self-defense. Today, a kidnapping attempt was made on Naruto. He threatened her life and hurt her. This was just her protecting herself. She is not the Kyuubi. Many people had seen the strange shinobi being taken away and were comforted by this explanation. A certain Anbu however thought that his master, Danzo, would find this very interesting. If a 4-year-old child could take down a trained shinobi, then she could make a very powerful weapon. He knew that Danzo had pushed for it before, but now with this, they might actually get somewhere. The crowd dispersed, leaving only several ninja and the 3 Namakazes behind. "Sensei?" a young voice inquired from behind them. They turned to see Kakashi Hitaki, Minato's 17-year-old ex-pupil standing behind them, worry evident in his own showing eye. "Is she okay?" Kakashi asked. He saw his sensei's kid like a baby sister and seeing her as distraught as she had been had scared him. Minato sighed and pressed a hand to his daughter's forehead, over the seal. "Yay, I think she'll be fine." He turned to another ninja around him. "Can you tell my secretary that I won't be returning to work today?" Kushina protested but he quickly shushed her. "My family needs me." The ninja nodded and shunshined away. "Kakashi, you can come with us if you want." The team nodded and the 3 ninjas all took to the rooftops within seconds. After that incident, Naruto had begun to receive shinobi training from both her parents, but also close family friends. She learned physical training off her father, read books with her mother, learned about hiding and stealth from Jiraiya, tracking from Kakashi and how to treat basic wounds without chakra from Tsunade. None of these things required chakras so far, but they were still useful to have. Many would say that they were pushing the 4-year-old too hard, but it was better than her losing control and releasing the Kyuubi. Naruto's personality had changed slightly after the attack as well. They had been forced to tell her about what she contained, even though that had originally wanted to wait until she was older. This knowledge weighed upon her young heart and caused her to act a couple of years older than before. She spent almost all her time training to be stronger and rarely saw her friends anymore, preferring to train instead. Kushina literally had to drag her away to go to her friend's house. As Kushina watched her girl train outside once more, she sighed, reflecting back to 3 days ago, when Naruto had unlocked her chakra on purpose for the first time. She had been at the Uchihas watching her 6-year-old, big brother, Itachi train his chakra control by walking up and down trees, when she asked if he could teach her, to which he had said no and that she had to unlock her chakra first. When she asked how, Itachi suggested that she try to meditate and find it first. When she had, he said that she should try sticking a leaf to her forehead by sending the chakra there. Naruto quickly agreed and sat down before closing her eyes. Being 4, she had no idea how to meditate, so she just sat there and tried thinking of what she thought chakra would feel like. The image of red tails swirling around her came to mind and the feeling of power that accompanied it followed. She tried to recreate that feeling but couldn't quite get it. That power felt strong, but also angry and scared her slightly. There was another power however, not nearly as strong, but it was calmer and more welcoming. She tried to find that power and after several minutes, she had it. The calm feeling flowed around her and when she opened her eyes, a blue aura surrounded her. She lifted up a hand and found that the aura swirled when she moved. "Hey Kai, Mummy, Aunt Miko," she called out happily. "Look what I can do." She got noticed the aura disappearing and she concentrated on bringing it back, wanting it to be there so they could see it. The new burst of chakra made the aura ripple and swirl faster, making her giggle. When the adults came out, they saw Itachi staring slack-jawed at Naruto sitting on the ground and playing with visible chakra. She would pulse her chakra out and watch as it moved around her. "Baby, what are you doing?" Kushina asked in wonder. Naruto frowned slightly. "I was watching Kai climb trees and he said I had to find my chakra first if I wanted to do it too. So I looked and this was the nice one and it's so pretty, isn't it?" Makoto laughed, still in awe. "Yes, Ru, it's very pretty." When they had gotten home that night, Minato had wanted a demonstration, to which Naruto was happened to oblige. She called forth her chakra once more and made it swirl. Later on, when they were in bed, Minato had wrapped his arm around her and told her that he would begin training Naruto with chakra within the next week. And honestly, Kushina didn't know whether to be happy or sad. She couldn't help but worry that her baby wouldn't get a childhood, and before they knew it, it would be too late. The next year passed quickly. Naruto grew up with the love of her family and friends surrounding her. She entered the academy when she was 5 and graduated a year later. She had the uncanny ability to remember things after all being told them once, or reading them once. This also applied to jutsu. She was able to learn them unnaturally fast. There was no point her staying in the academy when they had nothing left to teach her. It still came as a surprise to her, however. Naruto had just turned 6 years old and Minato didn't know what to do. She was bored at the academy, it was obvious. There was nothing new that they could teach her, but he didn't know if she was ready to become a genin. She was only 6 years old, for crying out loud. He seemed to conveniently forget that both his own student Kakashi and more recently Itachi had graduated at that age. However, he had to remain fair to all his shinobi, and keeping her in the academy when she could easily graduate was not fair. This didn't mean he couldn't make things a little easier on himself though. "Anbu," he summoned. Immediately 4 Anbu knelt in front of his desk. "Find dog for me as fast as you can." They saluted and separated to go search the village. Within 10 minutes they were back, along with another Anbu agent with a dog mask and silver hair that spiked almost straight upwards. "Thank you, now may you leave us please." They nodded and disappeared. He knew they would be close, but they wouldn't listen in. That done, Minato addressed the Anbu before him. "Kakashi, you can take off your mask." When the mask was removed, he continued. "I have an assignment of sorts for you." He grinned inwardly, knowing that his former student would never suspect this. "I want to demote you back down to Jonin." He held up his hand to halt the protests and continued, enjoying this immensely. "As I was saying, I want you to become a Jonin again, or, more specifically, a Jonin sensei." Kakashi's mouth dropped open in shock. "Huh?" he mumbled eloquently after a moment. This time Minato couldn't hold in his grin. "I want you to take a genin team. There's a couple of promising graduates this year that I think you will take a liking to." Kakashi couldn't believe it. He loved Anbu, he was even a captain, for crying out loud. He already had a team. "But sensei, don't you think that I'm the wrong person? I don't even like kids." "You like Naruto." "Yay, but she's different. If she was graduating I wouldn't mind it as much, but other than that, it's like torture, sensei." When Minato didn't do anything but grin widely, Kakashi slowly caught on and his eyes crinkled, the equivalent to a smile spreading across his face. "You're graduating her?" he exclaimed. At Minato's nod he laughed, throwing his head back. "Okay, now I'm looking forward to this. When are you going to tell her? Have you already told her?" Minato shook his head. "No, I wanted to give you a heads up, scope out the possible graduates and see who would be the best team for her. She's only 6, so she's going to need good teammates who won't look down on her." Kakashi agreed, and promised to take a look at the graduating class. Minato sighed in relief and thanked the new Jonin before dismissing him. Despite everyone's best attempts in making him stop, Kakashi still insisted on being at least an hour late to every appointment except for the ones with himself. Minato was proud to say that he was the only person in the whole village that Kakashi showed up on times for. Minato didn't mind much though. Kakashi was on time when it was important, and that's all that counted. He himself would prefer to be able to visit his deceased student's memorial more often if he could. He predicted he would have several hours until he got a report back and figured if he finished his paperwork quickly enough, then he could sneak home for some one-on-one time with Kushina. With this in mind, the blonde Hokage furiously attacked the papers in front of him. Kakashi sped over the rooftops at a comfortable speed in the general direction of the academy. Although he was still disappointed that he was being taken off Anbu, teaching Naruto would almost make up for it. He would have to be careful that he didn't neglect his two other students however, as that could be dangerous for them when they finally go out in the field. He reached the academy 10 minutes later and landed noiselessly in a crouch in one of the trees around it. The students should be finishing class any minute now, but he didn't want them to know he was there. Being caught spying on little kids isn't the best thing to have on your reputation after all. It was a simple matter to cast a middle-ranked genjutsu over himself that would make him blend into the background, but also mask his scent and any noise he might make. A skilled shinobi should be able to find him easily enough by sensing the chakra he used, as it did nothing to hide that, but for academy students it would suffice. As he predicted, a couple of minutes later a loud bell rang throughout the school and a stampede of excited kids spilled out of the doors. They separated into numerous different groups and all it took was Kakashi to measure their heights and body behavior to find the ones who would be leaving this place sometime soon. Most of the kids were very loud, while a couple were quieter. There were several kids that stood out in his mind as possible students, but he would have to see them in class to finalize his opinions on them. After watching the children interact with each other for a while, Kakashi decided to find Naruto and see how she was around her fellow classmates. It didn't take him long, there was a kind of pecking order he had discovered at this school. The older kids sat around the training grounds, the middle years around the playground, and the younger ones around the oval. He remembered it being the same even in the short time he had spent here when he was little. Naruto herself was situated in the very middle of the oval and whilst there were only a couple of people around her, he noticed that nearly all the other kids were as close to them as possible without being included in her group. Their eyes would also flicker to her a lot, signifying that she was the topic of their discussion. The people with Naruto herself was a tiny slip of a girl, pretty much just skin and bone, with pale skin and dark brown hair. She had her skinny arms wrapped around knees drawn into her chest, the posture of someone who wasn't confident about herself. The other kid was almost the complete opposite. She was a very chubby girl and was spread across the grass with a packet of chips in her hands that she was eating at happily. The sheer resemblance she had to the Akamichi was a clear indicator that she was from that clan. Judging from the looks filled with jealousy and anger those two were receiving, it was obviously considered a privilege to be able to sit with Naruto, and one that many coveted apparently. Kakashi sighed and rubbed the back of his head, half in annoyance and half in amusement. Naruto had the annoying habit of picking up things no one else wanted and making them special. She was constantly bringing home stray animals for her to fix up and make better before finding them homes. She did the same with old toys that she found, she would bring them home and fix them, before giving them away again. It seemed that now she had progressed to living people. One of the kids would have been teased for being fat, and the other for being weak. He guessed that Naruto had become friends with them so that the others would see that there was more to people than their appearance. She was already looking underneath the surface, something that took many shinobi years of experience to learn. The bell rang once more and Kakashi shunshined over to the soon-to-be graduates' classroom, grabbed a roll call list and a file containing information on the kids, and shushined back out. He arrived before the kids so had plenty of time to situate himself in a tree outside the class and reapply the genjutsu. The students trickled in and as the last one took their seat, Iruka Amino, the Chunin teacher, closed the door behind. The class started off fairly quickly and he quickly noticed that there were only a couple of kids who actually listened to him. By halfway through the class, Kakashi had narrowed down his list of possible students to 4 kids. 2 were from popular clans in Konoha, 1 was a civilian, and 1 was from a minor clan. The 2 from the big clans were Takeru Inuzuka and Amaya Nara. He chose Takeru because even though he was both loud and brash, the Inuzuka were famous for their loyalty to their friends and their fierce taijutsu skills. Also, with Kakashi being a dog summoner himself, he felt that they would get along nicely. He chose Amaya because she proved to be an energetic and cheerful girl, a rare oddity for her clan who were infamous for their lazy approach to life. She definitely knew the books back to front, and in the short time he observed the class he guessed she would make a great strategist one day. The other 2 kids were a boy called Riku Shin and Akio Harishu. Riku was from a civilian family but he showed definite potential and a drive to excel. He was near top of the class and was especially good at controlling his chakra, even in ways older shinobi couldn't. Kakashi saw him connect chakra strings to random objects in the room throughout the lesson and make them move, much to the annoyance of Iruka and the amazement of the other students. Akio, however, Kakashi was the most excited about having as his student, besides Naruto, that is. The Harishu clan were a very small clan of Konoha, but possessed a very powerful bloodline. The only reason why the clan wasn't the most powerful was for the fact that a downside to the bloodline was that it had a very high mortality rate when in use, which kept the clan's numbers at an extreme low. No shinobi in the clan had lived past 28 ever since the founding of Konoha. Many people assumed that it only killed its users because it hadn't been completely mastered yet, and once it had, it wouldn't have the detrimental side effects. The bloodline itself, however, was the most amazing thing, said to be even stronger than the Sharingan when judging potential alone. It's called the Jikanteido, or the Time Halter. Unlike its name suggests, the Jikanteido doesn't actually stop time. What it does is speed up every one of your senses and abilities to unimaginable lengths. Your thinking, your movement, your breathing, everything. Because you're running at a much faster speed than the rest of the world, however, they seem to be moving in extreme slow motion, if at all. This allows you to eliminate any threats with no trouble at all, as it's like the enemy is frozen. The weakness to it, however, is that when it is activated, it damages your body constantly. To create the increase in speed, the Jikanteido needs energy, and to get this energy, it converts anything it can in your body like fats, carbohydrates and sugars. After it's used up all your body's available stores, however, it moves on to muscles and eventually organs. So the longer you use it, the more you hurt yourself. Too many of the Harishu clan had pushed themselves too far when using their abilities and had died because of it. The physical manifestation of the bloodline was in the eyes, however it wasn't classified as a dojutsu. The signs of the Jikanteido were golden eyes, the color of honey that would glow brightly when it was in use. Not everyone in the Harishu clan inherited the Jikanteido, but it happened more often than not. For the past couple of generations, however, more and more members were deciding to remain civilians rather than take the risk of killing themselves. Akio had inherited his clan's bloodline, but chose to become a shinobi anyway, against his mother's wishes. His father had died when he was just a baby from overusing his bloodline, and his mother didn't want him to have the same fate, preferring him to join their family's ninja tool business. Having gathered all the information he needed, Kakashi casually made his way back to the Hokage's office. He picked 4 possible students despite knowing he would only get 2 because the Hokage might have other plans for some of them, like the famous Ino-Shika-Cho trio. He made it back to the Hokage Tower almost an hour later, after stopping off at a snack bar to grab a bite to eat before continuing. Deciding not to use the door, Kakashi strolled up the wall and climbed in through the window, much to the displeasure of his sensei. Why do none of the shinobi in this village use the door? Minato sighed, exasperated. It's a very nice door, and I bet it feels left out when no one uses it. Kakashi shook his head at his sensei's folly and lightly threw 4 of the files on the desk. Minato raised an eyebrow at him before taking a look. His student had made fine choices with his students, picking kids that would both work well with Naruto, but also with each other. Alright, he said after a moment. You can't have these 2, he said, gesturing to 2 of the files, but you can have these. Kakashi's eye crinkled in a smile. He was definitely pleased with how things turned out, and he was finding himself just the tiniest bit more excited to teaching. Now that he'd had time to think it through, maybe it was time that he passed on his knowledge to the younger generation, like his sensei had done to him. Okay, Kakashi. Minato was happy that he was able to make his student more comfortable with teaching. You can skip the Jonin meeting tomorrow, but make sure that you get to the academy at noon to pick up your new students. Kakashi bowed before he shunshined out of the office. He had some setting up to do for his little genin tomorrow. Now just where did he put those bells again? Minato debated for the rest of the day whether or not to tell his daughter about her soon-to-be graduation, but decided against it and let it be a surprise. He told Kushina that night, of course, and she seemed to have mixed feelings about it. On one hand, she was happy because she knew Naruto would be ecstatic about it and she was proud of her daughter, but on the other hand she was once again worried that they were rushing her development and not allowing Naruto to have a normal childhood. In the end, Minato finally convinced her that it would be Naruto's choice tomorrow and she could always refuse to graduate if she wanted to. Kushina agreed, but she knew that Naruto would never refuse, Her dream was to be Hokage like her father after all. Naruto woke up late the next morning and had to rush to get dressed on time. Ever since she started the academy, her mother had bought her appropriate clothing, which she immediately fell in love with. She wore a violet singlet with an off-white jacket over the top that had a red swirl on the back for her mother's clan. The top of her seal was just visible through the neckline of the shirt, but she didn't mind. She'd had her whole life to get used to it after all. She had 3/4-length brown pants on and wore shinobi sandals. Naruto left her long spiky blonde hair down to fall around her waist, but used a pin to get it out of her face. Then she hurried to the academy assuming it would just be the same as every other day so far. She honestly didn't expect much out of her day as she knew everything they would teach anyways. Nonetheless, she didn't want any special treatment and refused to ask that she be moved up to a more challenging year group. She arrived 5 minutes after the bell and quickly rushed to her homeroom, hoping they hadn't done the roll call yet. To her great luck, she arrived just in time and took her seat, ignoring the looks that she always attracted. Much to everyone's ignorance, it had been hard for her to make friends here as everyone only wanted to know her because she was the Hokage's daughter. Her friends from the clans were either older, like Itachi, or younger. The only one who wasn't was her age was Neji, but he was receiving private tutoring until he was at least 9. She was popular and cool and it was hard to find people that didn't care about that. In the end it turned out that the only people who didn't were the people no one else cared about either. Beneko Akamichi and Emi Finoto were 2 girls that were being picked on for their appearances, but when Naruto started hanging around them, the bullying stopped nearly completely. They even started becoming popular themselves. She took a seat next to Emi with a smile and waved at Beneko. "Naruto," Emi said, her thin face lighting up. She was about to speak once more when a knock sounded on the door and another Chunin sensei with a scar on his nose stuck their head in. She knew he was for the older students, Uruki or something. "Good morning, Hiroko," the man said with a smile. "I'm here on request of the Hokage to collect Naruto-san so she can do the Genin graduation exam." Gasps rang out around the room, the loudest coming from her 2 friends. Her homeroom teacher however just smiled and waved her forward. "I thought something like this might happen. Come on, Naruto-san." Naruto could stop the wide smile from spreading across her face as she bounding to the front of the room and followed the scarred man out of the class and down the hallways. As they walked, he introduced himself and gave a brief explanation to what would be required of her. "Hello Naruto-san. My name is Iruka Amino and I'm going to be the one who will assess you, along with another Chunin called Mizuki." When she nodded in understanding he continued. "To be able to graduate, you have to pass 4 parts of the exam. The first is a written section. You need to score at least 75% or else you won't pass. The second is a weapons capabilities display where you will need to get at least 15/20 throws of any weapon on the target. The third section is a brief taijutsu match where you will be sparring against either me or Mizuki. We won't be going full out and judging on your performance, we will say whether you pass or not. The fourth and final section is where you have to perform 3 basic jutsu, the bunshin, the henge, and the kawarimi. If you can perform these to our satisfaction, then you will have passed the exam and become a shinobi of Konoha." She nodded once more but didn't say anything. She was mentally preparing for the exam and didn't want any further distractions. She knew because she was taking it early then it would be harder than for the others, but if her father thought she could do it then she would make him proud. When they arrived in the class, silence fell immediately. Iruka just stared in amazement as his students were all silent. He had been trying to get that to happen for years with no results. Slowly, whispers started back up and he shushed them before they could get out of control. "Everyone," he said loudly, gaining their attention. "This is Naruto Namikaze. She will be taking the Genin graduation exam with us today. I hope you all show her respect and don't bother her. She is just another student in here." Naruto decided she liked Iruka and took a spare seat at the front of class. If Itachi had graduated when he was 8, not 6, then he might have been in this class. If she graduated today however, she would beat his record by at least 4 months. "Okay class. The first section of the exam is starting now. Papers will be passed around. If you cheat, you fail. You have 1 hour from now. Begin." Naruto was one of the first people to receive the exam paper and looked it over quickly before beginning. Most of the questions weren't too hard to answer and the ones she got stuck on, she skipped to come back to later. By the end of the hour, Naruto had answered every question and was confident that she would do excellent. Anything less would be an insult to her mother's book education. When the last person put their pencils down, they were led outside into the training grounds, where there were targets set up all around the edges, in a various range of distance and angle. Okay, you all have finished the written part, now this is the accuracy. Please do your best. You get 20 throws and at least 15 have to be on the target anywhere. You need to use at least 2 different weapons, but any more than that is by choice. Miko Anto, you're first. One by one, the genin hopefuls stepped out of the crowd and selected the weapons they were going to throw. Most of them only chose kunai and shuriken, but some decided to use others like senbon, throwing stars, and in one boy's case, a strangely shaped knife that twirled as it flew towards the target. She got bored a couple of people in, however, and got distracted by counting the cracks in the bricks beneath her. One boy, however, caught her eye. She didn't hear his name, but when his kunai and shuriken went off course, she saw him use his chakra to make strings almost and redirect them. She didn't think the senseis noticed and were very impressed when he got 20-20. Not long after that, her name was called and Naruto made her way slowly to the weapons table, all eyes on her. Looking at the selection of weapons, she chose 5 kunai, 5 senbon, 5 throwing stars, and 5 shuriken. Collecting her weapons, 10 in each hand, she made her way over to the targets. With an encouraging nod from Iruka, Naruto took a deep breath and placed 4 of her senbon in the gaps between her fingers of her right hand and held the 5th one in her left. Then she closed her eyes and, in one fluid movement, she flung the senbon straight in front of her. Not a second later she threw the 5th senbon, which hit 2 of the others and sent them off in a different direction. When she opened her eyes again, each senbon was buried neatly in a target. 3 were dead center in the bullseye, but 2 were slightly off. Without pausing for a break, she threw the throwing stars in the same fashion and then the kunai and shuriken 2 at a time. By the end of her go, 16 of her weapons were all tightly buried in the bullseyes of every single target, with the remaining 4 surrounding them. Surprisingly, it was the easiest targets that she was slightly off in, whereas she made the harder targets without a problem. She turned to see the other students staring at her in open-mouthed wonder and the teachers only slightly more in control of their expression. She blushed and bowed before making her way back to her previous position near the side of the class. After a moment Mizuki cleared his throat and called out the next name. There were 2 other kids who got 20-20 and a couple more with 18s and 19s, but none were as flashy as she was. Finally, it was time for the taijutsu testing. Once again there were a couple of fights that stood out to her, and it was easy to tell between civilian children, who used the academy-taught taijutsu style, and clan children, who had personalized styles. When it came to Naruto's turn, she was selected to fight Mizuki. He bowed to her and dropped into a fighting style that she didn't recognize, which was surprising as she knew nearly all the Konoha fighting styles. Naruto herself used a mixture of her mother's whirling stream style, which focused on evasion and agility before darting in for quick and effective attacks, and her father's Tiger Fist style, which was about hitting as hard as possible and as fast as possible in conjunction with his Hiraishin. Surprisingly, the 2 styles actually melded together quite nicely, morphing into what they had decided to call the Whirling Tiger style, which was about using her natural agility, speed, and Kyuubi-enhanced strength to both dodge and attack. It wasn't finished yet, but when it was, it would be a powerful style. She bowed in return and got into her starting position, with one hand held palm up in front of her and the other to her side. With the word from Iruka, they darted toward each other. Since the point of the match was to avoid being taken down by the Chunin, or to get an attack on him, Naruto's style was a perfect fit. She dodged a light punch aimed for her shoulder and dropped before he could use his elbow to hit her. Once in a crouch, she rolled to the side and flicked her leg up as fast as she could, narrowly avoiding hitting Mizuki in the balls. The watching males all winced at the close encounter and their hands twitched ever so slightly towards their jewels. Mizuki did a backflip away before coming in and attempting to sweep her legs out from under her, to which she avoided once more and darted in to almost give him a painful jab in the kidneys. This continued on for several minutes, Naruto avoiding all hits made towards her but not making as many moves as she could have. Mizuki himself was getting more and more annoyed the longer the match went on and soon found himself actually trying to hit her like he would if he was sparring against Iruka. Still however, he was unable to get a solid hit on her and eventually Iruka called it quits. Mizuki immediately stopped, his breathing slightly heavy, to find that Naruto was standing there not even out of breath and smiling, like it had been a game. She had known that she had a greater chance of avoiding his strikes and would create openings if she made too many advances, so she elected instead to remain on the defensive. The others kids all had their turns with their various styles, but this time she didn't get bored. It was interesting to see how the different styles matched up with others. After another hour, all the fights had finished and they headed back inside for the final section, the ninjutsu part. While only a couple had failed the test and dropped back in the previous sections, at least a third failed this one. Naruto had learnt the Kawarimi and Henge when she was 4, so she had no problem with them, but because of her near unlimited chakra reserves, she wasn't able to perform a normal bunshin and in the end had to resort to a cage bunshin. Her Ba-chan Tsunade had wanted to teach her medical ninjutsu, but she had never gotten past the most basic of techniques because she didn't have fine enough control. At the end of the day, the remaining academy students were officially made genin and shinobi of Konoha. Naruto decided on one of the forehead protectors with black cloth and tied it around her forehead proudly. The moment the bell rang, she burst out of the academy, surprising the others with her speed, and ran all the way home. When she got there, her parents were waiting along with her significant others, including her godparents, Jiraiya and Tsunade. Tsunade recent apprentice, a teenage called Shizune who was the niece to Dan, he deceased lover, and various members from the clans closest to theirs, like the Uchiha, Hyuga, Akamichi, and others. The Nara clan weren't there as they had their own graduation party going on apparently for one of the girls who had graduated. She spent the rest of the afternoon laughing and celebrating until finally falling into bed that night, asleep within moments. Naruto was awoken the next morning by her mother screaming at her to wake up or else she would be late. It seemed that spending too much time around Kakashi was causing her to become late to everything as well. She scrambled to get dressed and presentable before sprinting downstairs and stealing the piece of toast that her mother was just about to take a bite out of. "Thanks, Mom," she called back over her shoulder, leaving a grumbling Kushina to glare at the empty space left behind. Naruto arrived at the academy minutes later, just as the bell rang. She forewent the front door in favor of leaping in through the academy window, much to the surprise of the room's occupants, and sat down, only slightly out of breath. Iruka was already there and starting his morning speech of the day. "Okay class. Today is your first official day as shinobi of Konoha." He went on to give a long-winded speech about the importance of their new responsibilities and the dangers they would be facing, but no one paid him the slightest bit of attention. They did zone back in towards the end however. "I will be calling out your new teammates and Jonin senseis in a minute to listen closely. You will spend nearly all your time with these people, so get ready to get acquainted. Okay. Team 1, Kyobaru, Vera Fosudi and Zabina Dirishu under the Jonin Nino Capascio. Team 2. He continued on that way until finally her name was called. Team 7 will be Naruto Namikaze, Takaru Inazuka and Akio Harishu. Your Jonin sensei will be Kakashi Hitaki." Iruka had more to say, but Naruto stopped listening completely. She couldn't believe her father would keep this a secret from her. In fact, he was probably laughing to himself right this moment. She couldn't believe that she would get to train under her brother figure officially. As soon as the names were finished being called, Jonin began to arrive to collect their new students. Finally, it was just Naruto and 2 other kids left in the room. One was a short but stocky boy with scruffy brown hair and 2 little lines on each cheek, a bit like whiskers. Sitting on the desk in front of him was a small black puppy with white on its nose, stomach, feet and tail. Judging from his clan markings and pet, she would guess he would be the Inazuka. The other boy would have to be the Harushi kid then. Minato had told her all about the talents of their bloodline but also of the risks, and she couldn't help but pity him slightly. He had straight black hair held back by his forehead protector and intense honey-colored eyes. He was small for his age as well, only a couple of centimeters taller than Naruto herself. It was several hours later by the time the door finally opened and a certain masked ninja stuck his head in. "Greetings, Kakashi Hitaki," Konoha's infamously late ninja said. "Why don't we all meet on the roof for introductions?" And with that, he disappeared in a puff of smoke. It took several minutes for them all to gather at the roof, only to find their new sensei sitting down on a ledge reading a little orange book. When she saw the title, Naruto gathered a violet aura around her and her eyes glowed with slit pupils. Ignoring her now terrified teammates, Naruto stormed over to Kakashi before stopping a mere meter away from him. Kakashi looked up and gulped the moment he saw her furious expression and violet aura. "Kashi ni," she said, her voice sickly sweet. "What did I tell you about reading that book in my presence?" Kakashi laughed self-consciously and slowly put the book away before holding his hands up in surrender. He had learned long ago not to argue with Kushina or her daughter when they went into what was secretly thought by all of Konoha to be a new bloodline in the making. Not to?" he asked. Quick as a flash, Naruto reached up and boinked her big brother figure on the head, causing the watching genin to both wince in sympathy and open their mouths in awe at the sight of one of the most famous jonin in Konoha being treated like this by a 6-year-old. "Then why are you still reading it?" she demanded. Kakashi rubbed his now sore head and gave his little sister an eye smile. "Sorry little sis, you know me though, always want to appreciate good literature when I see it." Naruto huffed and muttered before turning away to sit down a couple of meters away. Only when her aura faded completely did the other genin consider it safe to approach. "Now that we've gotten that out of the way," Kakashi said, ignoring the quiet mutters Naruto were still making, "why don't we all introduce ourselves to each other? Our likes, dislikes, hobbies, dreams etc. We're a team now after all. You go first dog boy." Takaru frowned and cleared his throat. "Hi, my name is Takaru Inuzuka. I like Ricky, my dog partner that I'm going to get soon, and training. I dislike anyone who is cruel to animals and people who hurt my friends and family. My hobbies are running with Ricky and my dream for the future is to become the best tracker shinobi I can." Kakashi nodded and gestured to Akio. "Okay yellow eyes, you're next." Akio sighed and rubbed the back of his head. "Well, my name's Akio Harushi. I like my friends and ninja tools. I dislike people who look down on others and underestimate them. My hobbies are finding and restoring antique ninja tools for my family's business and my dream for the future is to prove to everyone that a shinobi from my clan can live past 28 and fully master our Jikanteido." Takaru frowned in confusion but Naruto and Kakashi nodded in understanding. They understood, even if they thought it was a foolhardy dream. "Alright then, Pineapple you're next." Naruto instantly gained her violet aura back and glared at Kakashi, who immediately backed down. "Hee you know I'm only joking, Ru." She glared at him one more time before sighing and returning to normal. "Hi, my name is Naruto Namikaze. I like my friends and family, training, and ramen. I dislike pineapples and people who only like me for my name. My hobbies are training and my dream for the future is to be an even better and more powerful Hokage than my father so that people will start seeing me for myself and not just my family." Kakashi already knew all this and cleared his throat. "All good introductions there. My name is Kakashi Hitaki. I like my friends and good literature. I dislike people who try to harm my comrades. My hobbies are reading good literature and my dream for the future, I don't really know actually." They all sweat dropped at the last comment and shook their head in half amusement, half annoyance. "Well, this has been fun. Meet me at Training Ground 4 at say 7 o'clock. Don't be late. We're having the real genin test then. Also, I would advise you not to eat breakfast, we don't want you throwing up now do we?" With a parting eye smile, Kakashi disappeared, leaving 2 confused genin and 1 deep in thought blonde-haired girl. The next morning, Naruto took her time waking up, had a hearty breakfast, and made her way down to Training Ground 7 in her own time. She arrived a couple of minutes before 10 to see her 2 teammates sitting there, bored out of their minds and with grumbling stomachs. "Where have you been?" Takaru demanded angrily. Naruto sighed and sat down beside them. "I knew Kakashi-sensei wouldn't get her until at least 10 so I took my time. He is infamous for being late in this village you know." Both male genin scowled and they sat in silence for another couple of minutes before Kakashi made his appearance, exactly at 10 feet o'clock. "Hello my precious genin," he greeted. "I hope you all hadn't been waiting long. I'm sorry but I got lost on the road of life and had to find my way." Naruto smiled sweetly. "Not at all," she replied while the 2 boys just glared. "I'm glad," Kakashi said slightly sourly. He knew Naruto would have turned up only minutes before. That was the disadvantage to teaching your little sister, they knew all your tricks. "Now for the real genin test." He pulled out 2 bells from his belt and held them up. See these bells? To pass, you have to compete with one another to get one from me before noon. Whoever doesn't get a bell gets sent back to the academy for another year. To get them, you'll have to come at me with the intent to kill. Both Akio and Takaru suddenly got on the defensive to each other while Naruto frowned slightly, deep in thought. Kakashi, she said slowly after a moment. There's no point us doing this test. Kakashi frowned now. He knew Minato hadn't mentioned the belt test to his daughter at Kakashi's specific request and they had been careful when talking about it, so there was no way she had any foreknowledge of the true purpose. And why is that? Because Akio and Takaru can have the bells. I'm only 6, I can go back to the academy for another year no problem. Sure, it would be annoying, but I'd suck it up. These two on the other hand can't do that as easily. It's really quite simple when you think about it. All 3 males stared at her in shock. None of them had expected such a mature decision to come out of her mouth. Kakashi was the first to recover. Are you sure about this, Naruto? Once I give these bells to them, you're not getting another chance to take your words back. You'll really be sent back to the academy for another year. Naruto's determined eyes faltered for a second before remaining strong. Yay, Kashi, I'm sure. He was about to open his mouth when Akio spoke up. No, it's not fair. If only you have to go back, you would be the youngest person to graduate ever in Konoha. You can't just shrug that off and say, well, better luck next time. I'll not have a bell and go back, my dream can wait. Takaru, not one to be outdone, spoke up as well. Or me. It doesn't matter to me all that much if I have to go back, although I can imagine the crap my brother will give to me about having to repeat. But Akio's right, Naruto, you're breaking records here, you can't just throw that away. And Akio, you can't just give up your dream for the moment, it's really important. Mine can wait another year. Kakashi watched the proceedings with pride. His genin instinctively got the true meaning behind the test without even having to fight. He couldn't have been prouder at that moment and cut off Naruto's next words quickly. In the ninja world, those who break the rules are trash, that's true, but those who abandon their comrades are worse than trash. He paused for a moment so they could absorb the information. You 3 have just passed the test. You proved that you can remain loyal to one another even when tested. Congratulations, new genin of Konoha. All 3 of the newly made genin cheered and jumped up to high-five each other. Today marked the next step in their lives, one that they would acknowledge and remember forever as being one of the most important. The next couple of weeks went by smoothly. All 3 genin became fast friends and neither of the 2 boys held any sort of resentment for her being just as, if not more, powerful than them despite being half their age. Their teamwork was excellent, with Akio revealing a clever mind able to deduce a solution to a tricky situation quickly. Because of this, Takaru and Naruto often referred to him when they were on a mission and wanted a plan. Since Takaru's specialty was close combat taijutsu, he was often their lead-up in any attack to either distract or push back the enemy. Then Naruto would follow with her ninjutsu attacks. Finally, Akio would use his ninja tools long distance to finish of the opponent whilst they were occupied. Besides his bloodline, the Harushi clan were well known for their use of unique ninja tools, like long chains with barbs on them or double-bladed kunai. Akio had almost completely mastered the use of at least 15 different weapons and usually kept at least one of each sealed into scrolls always kept on his person. They continued to do D-rank missions for several more months, preferring to train in their spare time and work on their teamwork rather than take on more difficult missions just yet. Whilst the D-ranks were boring, they could be completed quickly and Naruto found herself actually enjoying them sometimes. Especially the one to find the Fire Daimyo's cat, Tora. The cat was a very intelligent creature and it was good stealth training to try and sneak up on him. When they were completely missions, they spent their spare time training together. Kakashi taught the boys chakra control exercises like tree walking and Naruto water walking as she already knew how to climb trees. Besides that, they worked on their teamwork skills and low-rank jutsu. Kakashi was impressed with all his students' improvements but mostly with Naruto's. She progressed in leaps and bounds, getting stronger every day. He would give it another 6 months tops before she started asking to enter the Chunin exams. Today, however, was the 6-month anniversary of their team beginning and he had decided it was finally time for them to do AC rank. Okay team, he said, casually strolling up to where Akio and Takaru were waiting impatiently. Because it was such a monumental day, he had decided to only arrive an hour and a half later than the agreed time, not 2. "Where's Naruto?" The boys scowled at him in unison, looking creepily similar in that moment. "She isn't here yet, she's almost as bad as you when it comes to turning up on time." Kakashi's sweat dropped and rubbed the back of his head sheepishly. Her parents weren't going to be happy when they heard about this. It was another 20 minutes before Naruto came running up to them, her long spiky blonde hair streaming out behind her. "Sorry guys," she said cheerily. "I was walking here when out of nowhere I accidentally stepped on a drain. To get rid of my bad luck I had to run around the village counterclockwise 7 times. Hope I didn't miss anything important." All 3 male shinobi stared at her with open mouths, Kakashi's showing even through his mask. Her excuse was just as ridiculous as his, but genius. He beamed at his little protege. "Not at all, in fact, I have some important news that I want to tell you guys." They leaned forward in anticipation, all curious to what would be so important to get Kakashi to turn up less than 2 hours late. "Today, we will be taking our first C-rank mission." The 3 genin smiled and high-fived each other without even looking. They'd done it so many times before it was second nature to them now. "What are we waiting for then?" Naruto demanded, conveniently forgetting that they had been waiting for her. "Let's get going." And with that she disappeared in a blur, speeding on her way to the mission's tower and leaving the rest of Team 7 to sigh and follow behind at a much more casual speed. When they finally arrived they saw an impatient Naruto bouncing up and down on the balls of her feet with a scowl on her face. Without another word she stormed in and ordered a C-ranked mission off the poor unsuspecting Chunin there. Needless to say, the Chunin didn't take being ordered around by a 6-year-old very well and completely ignored her. Naruto growled and stormed up to the desk, her eyes only just managing to see over. "I said, we are here for a C-rank mission. Please," she growled out, trying to speak more nicely. The Chunin looked at her briefly before returning to his paperwork. "Go away little girl, go play ninja somewhere else." Naruto was about to yell at him once more when a hand landed on her spiky blonde hair and she looked up to see her sensei giving her an eye smile before addressing the Chunin. "Anyo, excuse me, but I believe that my student here has requested a C-rank mission for us?" The Chunin looked up once more and his eyes widened when he saw the Jonin in front of him. "She is your student?" he asked, gulping almost audibly. He had heard that the Hokage's daughter was being taught by Kakashi Hitaki and when he got a proper look, she did look a lot like the Yondaime. "Yeah, let me introduce you to her and her fellow students. This is Naruto Namikaze, Takeru Inuzuka and Akio Harishu." Now, his voice hardened slightly. "If you will, we would like a C-rank mission." The Chunin spat out apologizes and quickly threw them the first C-rank mission he got his hands on, wanting them as far away as possible as quickly as possible. Takeru caught the mission scroll and they left the room, their laughter sounding out through the closed door behind them. "That was brilliant, sensei." Akio chortled. "Did you see his face when he saw you and realized that Naruto wasn't just a little kid?" Naruto frowned at being called a little kid but let it slide, still too amused after the whole incident. "Of course I did, Akio. I was standing right in front of him." Akio flushed and grinned sheepishly at his sensei's retort. "Oh yeah, I guess so then, aha." Meanwhile, Takeru had opened the mission scroll and was reading through it speedily. "Hey guys, we got a good one." They all crowded around him to get a look except for Kakashi, who carefully pulled out a little orange book to read while they were distracted. Mission level C. Mission description. You are required to travel to the border of Fire Country and the Land of Swamps and relieve the team of Konoha ninjas already there doing border patrol. You will be non-aggressive towards the Land of Swamp ninjas unless provoked into fighting. You will not abandon your post unless in extreme circumstances until another verified Konoha team arrives. Estimated time: 20 days, not including travel time. On the bottom of the scroll was the Yondaime Hokage's signature. They all smiled at one another and agreed to set out the next day at 7 a.m. Kakashi said it would take roughly 3 days to travel there if they didn't rush and wanted to take it easy as they hadn't been out of the village before. Warning them to pack wisely, he shunshined away, eager to get back to his reading. "Wow, our first proper mission," Takeru exclaimed excitedly. "I'm gonna head home to tell my dad." And with that he ran away, leaving his 2 teammates alone. They walked together for some time, talking about meaningless things. Akio had found out that although Naruto had her childish moments, most of the time she was much more mature than other kids her age. Akio and Takaru both saw her as one of their closest friends, even if they did annoy the hell out of each other at times. Once they reached the cutoff where they had to go their separate ways, Akio ruffled her hair and turned away before calling out over his shoulder. "Catch ya later, pineapple," then bolting away so fast that he was a blur, not wanting to be caught by the furious 6-year-old. Naruto was going to chase after him and took a step forward before thinking about it for a second and letting it go. She could get him back tomorrow, and right now she had the rest of the day to spend with her family. With this in mind, the exuberant child leapt onto the rooftops and ran home ninja style. Her mother was waiting outside for her when she arrived, most likely because she had sensed her chakra approaching. Because of the Kyuubi, Naruto's chakra was more potent and different than anybody else's, and made it easier for sensory types like Kushina to detect. This was something that Naruto would have to work on fixing if she ever hoped to be any good as espionage and stealth. "Ru, you're home early." Kushina smiled. She was wearing an apron covered in flour and other kinds of cooking ingredients, causing Naruto to wince. Believe it or not, but her mother was actually terrible at cooking, and it was usually her father's job to cook dinners for them, or when he couldn't, her grandma Tsunade. Whenever Kushina got into the kitchen, it usually ended with fires and lots of yelling. "Yay, Kashi ni said we could have the rest of the day off today." She paused for a moment to build anticipation. "To be ready for our C-rank mission tomorrow." Kushina's eyes widened in surprise. She hadn't expected her nearly 7-year-old child to be given one so early on. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" She fretted. "You're not even 7 yet, and it's different outside of the village. Your father has lots of enemies who would jump at the chance to use you to hurt him." Naruto's smile dropped as she was once again reminded of the responsibilities that rested on her young shoulders. "Yay mom, I know. But I can't let fear run my life. If I do that, I won't ever be happy." No longer in the mood for company, Naruto trudged past her mother and up the stairs to her room, where she spent the rest of the day thinking to herself and packing before eventually falling asleep. She woke up the next morning early with a loudly grumbling stomach, sincerely regretting skipping dinner last night. Luckily, her parents had predicted this, and by the time she made it downstairs, at 5:40 in the morning, there was a full breakfast set out on the table and both her mother and father sitting there smiling at her, even if they still looked half asleep. The effort they put into her send-off touched her, and Naruto ran forward to give them both a hug. "Thank you. I'm sorry for being so moody yesterday." She apologized. Kushina smiled and kissed her forehead lightly before waving her to a seat. "It's perfectly fine, baby, it was my fault anyway. I'm just being a silly overprotective mother. I know Kakashi won't let anything happen to you anyways." Minato smiled and wrapped an arm around his wife's waist. "Have some faith in our daughter Kushina, she was trained by the best after all." With a wink at Naruto, Minato disappeared in a flash of yellow light only to reappear a second later with a scroll in hand. "I almost forgot. This is a sealing scroll that I prepared for you for your trip. It's pretty complicated to make but easy to use, so I don't think it will be a problem. It's got 3 sections to it. The first is for your bag containing your clothes, money, and whatnot, the second for your weapons, and the third for anything else you pick up during the trip. You can activate it by channeling chakra into the particular seal that releases the section." He handed the scroll to her with a smile. Naruto beamed at her father and quickly sealed all the things she was taking into it, making her travel weight much lighter. "Thanks Dad," she said. The 3 Namakazes ate their breakfast together and continued talking and catching up. They wouldn't be together again for several weeks, so they were taking their time, and before they realized, it was 7:30 a.m. and Naruto was bolting out the door with over-the-shoulder goodbyes being said. Kushina tried smiling but couldn't hide the worry and sense of foreboding that she had despite Minato's reassurances. He had double-checked that there had been no reports of hostile behavior anywhere nearby where she was going for several months. Everything would be fine. She's growing up so fast, Minato. Kushina sighed. Minato kissed his wife's cheek. "I know, and by the looks of it she's picking up some of Kakashi's less desirable habits." Then, the 2 elder Namakazes walked back inside to prepare for their day. Naruto herself hurried through the streets, ignoring the greetings the villagers threw her as they set up their business for the day. She usually would have replied except for the fact she was running late. Extremely late. to her very first proper ninja mission. She moved as quickly as possible to get to the gate. However, when she was just around the corner she slowed down and waited for her heartbeat to return to normal. Then, once she was breathing normal again, she walked casually to where her team was waiting impatiently. "You're late," Akio and Takaru yelled at her. Naruto smiled sheepishly. "Sorry guys, I was eating my breakfast when I realized that we didn't have any juice, so I had to go down to the shop and buy some. However, when I got to the shop, they only had pineapple juice, which is a disgusting abomination that is going to be banned when I'm Hokage." By the time I finally found a shop that sold something other than pineapple juice, it was already past 7 and I had to rush to get ready. All 3 male shinobi sweat dropped at the 6-year-old's antics but didn't say anything in reply. It seemed that the child had an even greater talent than Kakashi at making up lame excuses. The 2 boys stared at her in annoyance whilst the 19-year-older Jonin looked at her with eyes filled with pride. Her excuses rivaled his own. "That's understandable then," Kakashi smiled. "Okay team, it should only take a couple of days to get there, so we'll move at an easy pace to get you guys settled in. Team 7 move out." They leapt into the trees and set out at a pace that they would be able to hold for hours on end. Naruto's Kyuubi enhanced stamina came in handy here as she was able to keep going strong even when her fellow genin grew tired. Eventually Kakashi called it quits for the day just before dusk. Immediately Takaru and Akio collapsed on the ground with groans, completely exhausted, while Kakashi and Naruto looked on in amusement. "How?" Akio began, panting. "Are you not even out of breath, Naruto?" Naruto smirked evilly. "I guess you two are just super unfit and need to train more." Takaru groaned again and muttered under his breath something about maelstrom 6-year-olds and ridiculous stamina. "Come on Naruto," Kakashi said. "You can help me set up camp whilst these two recover." She nodded, and between the two of them, it was quick work to set up a couple of tents and start a fire. Because they weren't in hostile territory, they were able to have the fire and not worry about enemy ninjas spotting their campfire. The 2 boys crawled their way over to the fire and held their hands up to warm them against the sudden chill that was approaching like the shadows of the night. After a simple dinner, they each crawled into their own one-man tents and fell asleep quickly, trading off shifts of guard duty every 4 hours. The next morning they all awoke with the sun and did an hour's training before setting off on their travels once more. The next couple of days passed exactly the same as the first one, no events of any note occurring. Finally, after 3 days of traveling, they finally reached the rendezvous spot. Kakashi held up one hand and they all stopped immediately, breathing slightly elevated. "We are being approached. Prepare yourselves," Kakashi said, his voice serious. All 3 genin tensed and prepared to be attacked. Naruto slowly slid a kunai out of her pouch and held it at the ready, her heart thudding loudly in her ears. With her advanced hearing, Naruto could also faintly hear the sounds of her friends' hearts beating erratically as well. "Get ready everyone. This is your first real-world situation. It's not just fun and games, you could die. Everyone, prepare yourselves." It took several tense moments before they were able to detect the approaching shinobi as well, and a couple more before 4 shinobi landed in front of them. Naruto was so tightly wound that she almost threw her kunai at them before she really saw who they were. "Kakashi," Naruto said, pronouncing each syllable individually. "You knew they were our comrades, not our enemies, didn't you?" It was more of a statement than a question. Kakashi laughed. "Well, I thought it would be funny?" The 3 chunins in front of them sweat dropped whilst Akio, Takaru and Naruto grew tick marks. All at the same time, the 3 genin leapt forward and bonked their sensei on the head, leaving 3 lumps. Kakashi cried anime tears while the genin high-fived. "Well," Kakashi said, miraculously recovering. "We are Team 7, reporting for relieving border duty." The oldest chunin stepped forward, a sigh of relief on his lips. "Thank God, it's been quiet the whole time we've been here. I think the boredom would have killed us before any enemy did." The other 2 chunin laughed and nodded in agreement. "All right then." Kakashi eyes smiled. "Let's get to work." It was just like the chunins had said. There was absolutely nothing. Naruto was dead bored by the 3rd day and they had another 17. She stuck it out though and counted the days until she could go home. Finally, with 5 days to go, something finally happened. Naruto had been doing a round with Akio while Takaru was with Kakashi. They had been running close to the Iwa border when they sensed shinobi running parallel to them. They had stopped running immediately to see what the Iwa nins would do, and Naruto was disheartened to find that they stopped as well. Damn, Naruto thought. She could sense the power level of the shinobi and she could tell that there were at least 1 Jonin and 2 Chunin. There was a 3rd shinobi however that she couldn't sense. Either because their power level was so weak it didn't even register, or that they had chakra suppressing abilities, which wouldn't go over well for them, Naruto especially. Naruto? Akio whispered uncertainly. What are we going to do? Naruto gulped. She was 6. She wasn't ready for this. I think we should try get back to Kakashi-sensei. Akio gulped and nodded. Let's go. They got 200 meters before the shinobi cut them off, 2 in front and 1 on each side. Naruto's heart stopped for a moment. The Iwa shinobi had just crossed the border and were on enemy territory. Their instructions had said to remain non-aggressive unless provoked. Did this count as provocation? Are you Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze? The Jonin shinobi asked. Daughter of Minato Namikaze, the Yellow Flash and 4th Hokage? She could see Akio glance at her, alarmed, and flinched. Any chance she had of bluffing was just ruined. She nodded slowly. Who's asking? The Jonin laughed. You don't get to ask me that. You're what, the height of my elbows? No, I don't think so. I'm going to be the one talking here. Naruto gritted her teeth to stop herself from saying something she would most definitely regret. They were in a lot of trouble. So, here's how things are going to go down. You're going to come nicely with this and not struggle or try escape. He tilted his head, reading the defiance in her eyes. Why? Because if you don't. Suddenly the man from behind them had grabbed Akio and held a blade to his throat. The boy will die. Akio gulped and his neck got cut, causing a stream of blood to trickle down his neck. She knew, in that moment, that she would do anything the Iwa shinobi asked of her. She had no choice. She wouldn't let anything hurt her friends. Alright, Naruto said, and somehow, her voice was strong. Akio's eyes widened. No, Naruto. He was cut off as the Iwa Chunin closed his mouth forcibly. It's okay Akio, Naruto said, not looking at him. I'll be fine. I'm worth more to them alive than dead. You can go get Kakashi and kick their asses when you come to find me. Akio tried protesting again but it didn't work. Okay, she said, addressing the Jonin. Are we going now? The Jonin smiled, but it was a horrible smile. 1 second, let's just make a couple of preparations, you could call them. The shinobi she couldn't sense was suddenly beside her and placed a seal on her forehead. Immediately, Naruto felt her strength drain and her small body slumped. Her vision dimmed and her hearing became muffled. Okay, she vaguely recognized the Jonin's voice. Now that she's out of the way, let's go. Kill the boy. Alarms went off in her mind. No, this isn't what he said would happen. Yes sir. Naruto tried struggling out of the haze she was in. It was like she was underwater. All her movements sluggish and heavy. There was the strange sound of a wet slice and then a heavy thud. Naruto was thrown over someone's shoulder and her head rolled to see a form on the ground. With her dimmed sight, it took a couple of moments to realize what it was. It was Akio, but his head was weirdly positioned, like the neck wasn't as thick as it used to. Naruto felt like throwing up as she realized that it wasn't as thick as it used to be. His throat had been cut so deep that half of it was missing. There was no way he could survive that. Red pulsed at the edges of her vision, making everything clear once more. Anger, as sharp and deadly as a knife cut through her. Her blood pulsed in her ears and she tensed for a moment, alerting her captors that something was wrong. Wah? He never got to finish his sentence however as a moment later her fist had sent him spinning through the air by his face. She landed on the ground in a crouch and felt herself gain more grip than usual. It only took a moment's glance to see that she had claws growing out of her fingers. The tattoo on her chest felt like it was pulsing, not painfully, but enough for her to notice. Naruto didn't understand where all this strength came from suddenly, but she knew she had to use it, to get revenge on the people who killed her friend. The Kyuubi stirred in her head. Naruto growled and launched herself at the man who killed Akio. Red chakras swirled around her hands and when she swiped at him, his flesh bubbled and melted away. He was a mess of bones and blood within seconds. In some part of her mind she was horrified at what she had just done, but it was a very small part. Naruto wasn't satisfied with just that though, and sent out a burst of chakra in a wave that split the remaining shinobi clean in half before they could jump away. The whole thing had taken less than 2 seconds from when she landed in a crouch to when all of them were dead. That's right, kill them all. The voice in her head unnerved her endlessly, but it was strangely compelling as well. She wondered distantly if it was the Kyuubi. Go over to that bad man. Naruto made her way over, still on all fours. Once there, she stared at his body, well half of his body, and looked into his sightless eyes. Mark him. Let all who see his body know who it was that killed him. Let them know that you are strong. Naruto let loose an ear-splitting growl and a beam of red chakra exploded from her to shoot straight up in the air. Then, with one burning hand, she placed it on the mon's chest. The sound of cooking meat reached her delicate nostrils, and when she took her hand away, a sign had been burned onto his skin. It was a fox's face, with 9 lines sprouting around it like a sun. Good little kid. Somehow, the voice sounded satisfied. Rest now. You've done well. As quickly as the strength had come, it faded. No longer able to hold herself up, even on all fours, Naruto fell. She was asleep by the time she landed on the blood and gut-soaked ground. Her clothes, which had once been purple, white and brown, were now red. Red all over. Meanwhile with Kakashi had been running north along with border with Takaru, and was just about to turn back when he felt it. Pure maliciousness, hatred that could only come from one thing. With a gasp, he whirled around and ordered Takaru to follow him. A beam of red chakra shot into the sky for a moment and Kakashi headed that way without another thought. If the Kyuubi was escaping, he needed to get to Naruto and stop it. Cold dread wormed its way into his stomach. He was a realist enough to know that he was no match for a Jinchuriki. If the fox really was escaping, there wouldn't be much that he could do. Sensei, what's going on? The genin asked, his voice shaking. The panicked look on his sensei's face scared him more than anything else. Something might be wrong with Naruto, we have to get there quickly. He said urgently, picking up the pace. By the time they reached the battle scene, Takaru was gasping for breath and Kakashi's one eye was wide open in horror. Blood and gore was everywhere. And he meant everywhere. At the back, Akio's dead body lay there, carelessly crumpled on the ground. Lying in the middle of everything, right in front of a mutilated body, was his sensei's daughter. Naruto? Takaru whispered. There was fear and horror in his voice. What did she do? Kakashi didn't even bother to answer and instead walked forwards, his boots squelching against the wet grass, to pick up the small child. He didn't know whether to feel relief that the Kyuubi hadn't emerged, or downright horror at what his student had done, his little sister. He could feel the blood from her soaking into his clothing and it sent a shiver down his back. But he was a shinobi, and shinobi had to grow accustomed to horrible things. We're leaving, Takaru, he said emotionlessly. He had failed. He had failed to protect his students. One was dead, and the other unconscious with unknown mental damage. And now a third was probably traumatized from seeing this. The single conscious genin tore his eyes away from the body of his teammate, from the gaping slit in his throat, and followed his sensei as he made his way out of the clearing. This was supposed to be an easy mission. How had everything gone so wrong? They didn't speak that night. Kakashi summoned one of his ninja dogs and sent a message to the Hokage requesting immediate relief from duty, and then they ate a cold dinner. Kakashi had done his best to wipe the blood off Naruto, but her clothes were still soaked and he was too drained to bathe her. He should probably have spoken to Takaru, who had never seen death before, but the boy's expression had hinted that he just wished to be left alone. Well, not really hinted, more like made blaringly obvious. Naruto didn't wake up at all the next day. Or the next. Or the next. In the end, Kakashi did have to bathe her in a nearby stream, scrubbing the blood from her soft skin and dressing her in some of their spare clothes. He went back to the scene on the second day to clean up and burn the bodies. The half that had a fox's face burnt on it with 9 lines disturbed him greatly and he hid it before the genin could see it. He buried Akio's body however, and Takaru stood next to him as they said their last farewells. The brown-haired boy had cried but Kakashi didn't comment on it and instead just placed a hand on his shoulder, silently letting him know that he wasn't alone. Their relief arrived on the third day but Kakashi didn't tell them why they were there, just passed over his identification. The less people who knew about the incident the better. He did tell him that there were Iwa shinobi in the vicinity however. Kakashi carried Naruto on his back the whole trip back. Once again, there was silence between student and sensei, until finally, on the very last leg of the journey to Konoha, he breached the subject they had been avoiding like the plague. "Takaru," he said softly, pulling his student to a halt. "We need to talk." The genin exhaled slowly and dragged his eyes up to meet his sensei's but didn't say anything, waiting for Kakashi to broach the subject. "I need to know how you're dealing with this." "How I'm dealing with this?" Takaru repeated flatly, no trace of his former exuberance on his face. "How do you think I'm dealing with this?" he shouted, desperation creeping into his voice. "One of my teammates are dead. He's never, ever going to come back. And the other one," Takaru took a deep, shuddering breath. "The other one is a monster." Kakashi couldn't stop the involuntary widening of his eye in shock. Of all the things he had expected, that hadn't been it. "You saw the bodies just as well as I did. She cut them all in half, sensei." "Half? What's to stop her from going psycho and doing that to any of us next time?" "Now listen, Takaru, that wasn't Naruto's fault. You know that the Kyuubi is sealed inside of her. Seeing the loss of her teammate probably just made her lose control?" he interrupted. "And what's to stop that happening again? Except next time it won't be from something as major. What happens the next time she gets angry at someone? Will the Kyuubi take over again then? I'll get Minato-sensei to tighten the seal." "And you think that will work?" he demanded, anger showing through. "You can't contain a demon forever. She's already been tainted, it's too late for her. It's better to just get rid of the demon while we can." Kakashi couldn't believe the words he was hearing. "You can't honestly believe what you're saying," he choked out, but the look in the boy's eyes was clear enough. Yes, he did believe it. "Don't worry though," Takaru said, turning away from the shocked silver-haired ninja. "I'm not fool enough to believe that I could defeat you, so I'm not going to make a move on her. But once we get back to the village, I'm requesting a new team." Kakashi felt a horrible feeling in his stomach and after a moment recognized it as shame. Shame and guilt. Now he'd failed all three of his students. So much for being a good sensei. If that's what you want. There must have been something in his tone that alarmed Takaru because when he turned around, his eyes were softer. "It's not you, sensei. You are and will always be my sensei," he assured him. "I just can't work with her anymore. I can't work beside someone I don't trust." And with that, they headed off once more in dead silence. Meanwhile in Naruto's mindscape, when the blonde-haired girl opened her eyes, she found herself floating in water and she had no idea how she got there. Warm water. The strange thing was though, when she stood up, she was completely around. She noticed that she was in a sewer-like construction, with water dripping off the ceiling and walls. After several minutes of just standing there, she eventually started heading through the tunnels, deciding that she may as well see where they lead. In the distance, she could hear voices and sounds but they were muffled, like coming from the other side of a wall. She thought she recognized her teammates' voices but wasn't sure. Wait, her teammates. Akio. Suddenly her memories came rushing back to her and she doubled over at the shock and pain that overwhelmed her. Akio was dead, and it was all her fault. She stumbled forwards a few more steps and suddenly collided with a ginormous metal prison that she was certain wasn't there a few seconds ago. A paper with the word, seal, on it was holding the gates closed. This must be where the Kyuubi was contained. Movement sounded from behind the bars and one large eye with red irises and slit pupils stared down at her, sizing her up. "So, you are my jailer." The voice boomed from the cage but reverberated all around the room, bouncing off the walls and seeming to get even louder. Gathering all the strength she could, Naruto glared up at the massive fox demon with all her 6-year-old might. "Yay, what of it, Kyuubi?" "Ha ha ha," he chuckled, amused by her cute anger. "So you know who I am. That is going to make this easier." Naruto's brow crumpled in confusion. "Make what easier? Or maybe not," the Kyuubi sighed. "You appeared here much sooner than I had expected. I'm not sure if you're ready to hear what I have to tell you." "I'm ready," she said, her eyes years older than a normal 6-year-old's. After what she had just experienced, she had to be. "What is it?" "I have some things to tell you, concerning both my attack on your village 6 years ago, and your future." Naruto's eyes widened in surprise and she settled down on the wet floor, preparing herself for a long story. "I'm ready," she repeated. "But first, what should I call you? I'm sure that Kyuubi isn't your real name." Something akin to shock and approval shone in the demon's eyes and he bowed his head the slightest bit. Names do not hold as much meaning to my kind as they do to yours, but I was given the name Kurama by my creator at my birth, if you want to call it that. Naruto nodded and gestured for him to begin. Okay, if you are sure you are ready, I will begin the night of your birth. When I felt the seal weakening, I struggled against it, wishing for my freedom more than anything else. You have no idea what it's like to be trapped in a cage every second of every day. Eventually, I managed to escape, and was preparing to retreat as far away as I could before that damn mortal could seal me up again. Naruto could both see and hear the scowl Kurama had in his voice. As I was leaving, however, I was intercepted. A man with those accursed Sharingan eyes caught me and forced me to attack your village. I had no wish to do this, but was made to against my choice. He paused to allow her to digest the information. How do I know you're telling me the truth? She asked after a moment, staring him in the eyes. For all I know you could be lying. Kurama sighed, annoyed. I was hoping you would be just a trusting little child like you should be, but it seems not. Come closer, I shall show you my memories. It will be easier this way anyway. It will hurt, however, so prepare yourself. Naruto steeled herself and walked through the bars of the gate, stepping right up until she could touch his nose. Her hand didn't even cover 1/50th of the size of his nose alone. Like he had said, it hurt. Pain shot through her head, causing her to gasp and squeeze her eyes shut. Images ran through her mind. He was so close. He could feel the chains tying him down giving up. He could feel them about to break. One more heave. Okay, just one more. And one more. Okay, this was definitely the last one. Okay, definitely this one. Damn, how strong were these things. He growled and heaved with all his might and, with one last groan, the chains snapped from their position on his furred mass of a body. He burst out off the burning flame mortal that kept him captive and took his first breath of fresh air in far too long. It was heaven. He knew he had to get away quick, before they could seal him again, and he headed for north, for his home. Suddenly, a figure stood before him. A masked man with red eyes. He growled and tried looking away, but it was too late. He could feel his thoughts slowly down and his willpower being crushed. Within seconds his body was moving without him telling it to. No matter how much he thrashed against the control, he couldn't gain even the slightest bit back against those horrible Sharingan eyes. He felt as his body attacked and destroyed all around him, and then came the tightening feeling of a seal sucking him in. He squirmed and tried to fight it. No, he refused to be sealed again. He was so close to getting away. He couldn't fight it though, and he was once again sealed into a mortal body, a shining gold child this time. Its cries pierced his ears as he was locked in a cage deep in its mind. Helplessness and therefore rage overtook him. He was trapped. The great Kyuubi no Kitsune was nothing more than a prisoner once more. He was so close. Naruto threw herself out of the memories. The sheer amount of pain and helplessness that Kurama had felt was so strong that it shocked her young heart, unable to withstand the emotions of a creature with a millennia of years under its belt. No wonder he tried to possess her every time she got mad or in danger. They were the only times he would be able to sense the outside world after all. She would probably have done the same thing if the roles were reversed. I understand, she said quietly. Thank you for showing me this. Once more Kurama bowed his head slightly. Thank you for understanding. Now, for the next part. Now that you know that I am not merely a creature made of hate, I believe that we could benefit one another. Naruto frowned and stroked his coarse fur softly. It had the weirdest feel to it, soft, and yet rough at the same time. It would be comfortable to lie on. And so she did, much to Kurama's amusement. How so? Well, you are currently weak. Whilst you are strong for your age, any half-decent chunin could take you down without much of a problem. Also, you become overwhelmed by your emotions the moment you touch my chakra. The reason why you get so bloodthirsty when you use my chakra is because you don't have enough control. Right now, you can only access it in times of great emotion, and this only happens when you're feeling rage or pain. In the future, you will be able to use my chakra at will, and whilst you might be still more emotional than usual, you won't lose control. Naruto took all this in, processing it and then nodding for him to continue. What I propose is that we make a sort of truce or deal between us. I want you to allow me access to your senses, the ability to see, hear, smell, touch, and taste, and redesign this stinking cage you have me in. Also, you have to promise to kill the man with the Sharingan eyes and mask sometime. In return, I will train you in how to be a Jinchuriki to your highest potential, and will also show you how to use the gift that you were gifted with upon my sealing." Seeing her frown, he smirked slightly. "Ah, you haven't awakened it yet. Fret not, you have plenty of time. Once you have awoken it, I will train you in how to use that as well." Naruto weighed her options mentally before deciding. She had experienced firsthand Kurama's emotions during the attack, and knew that he didn't mean to harm Konoha that day. On top of that, him being able to sense the outside world through her wasn't that bad, she wouldn't even notice it probably. With killing the masked man, it seems that he was against Konoha anyway, and she loved her village deeply, and would eliminate any threat towards it, so that was fine as well. And plus, she was the only Jinchuriki in the village. If Kurama didn't train her, chances were that she wouldn't be able to reach her full potential. "Okay, Kurama," she said, grinning up at the huge demon fox. "I accept. From now on, we're partners, K? Partners?" he mused. "Okay, we shall be partners, Kit. Now rest. Your mind has come under a great amount of stress that even my chakra cannot heal. I have done my best to keep off the pain while you have been talking to me, but I won't be able to do that whilst you're awake. I'm sorry." And there was real regret in his voice. "Now that I have your consent, I can rearrange my surroundings myself, and form the connection between us. Just don't resist if you suddenly feel dizzy for a couple of moments every now and then when you wake up. It's just your body getting used to it." Naruto nodded and closed her eyes, concentrating on leaving the sewer place, and, much like falling asleep, she drifted off into darkness. Minato brushed his daughter's hair back from her forehead tenderly. It had been a week and a half since Kakashi had brought her home unconscious. He had, in short, clipped sentences, explained what he thought had happened on his mission. Minato was probably the one to know the copy ninja the best out of everyone, and had clearly seen how much his former student was suffering. The Hokage had gritted his teeth when Takaru's new views had been brought to light, but couldn't do anything about it. The boy hadn't acted on his feelings, and he was perfectly entitled to his thoughts. As it turned out, however, acting upon it had been made unnecessary on the third night of their return. The Inuzuka's family had found him in his bedroom the next morning in a pool of his own blood. His suicide note had stated that he couldn't live with the feelings inside himself, and needed to do it. His parents were hit hard, but Kakashi possibly harder. Whilst his parents only felt grief, and possibly anger, Kakashi felt grief, anger, shame, guilt, and more guilt, and more guilt. He was blaming himself, despite Minato's constant assurances that there was nothing he could have done. Since then, the silver-haired ninja had barely left his single remaining student's side, only leaving to sleep and eat. The very same thing Minato and Kushina had been doing. It was Minato's shift to watch her tonight as Kushina and Kakashi went home and got some sleep. His hand stroked his daughter's hair again, and, when he glanced down, was shocked to see violet eyes staring back at him. "Naruto?" he stuttered, barely believing his eyes. Hers filled with tears as she rolled over and buried her face in his chest, sobs racking her small frame. He held her tightly as she cried herself back to sleep, rocking her and murmuring in her ear. His baby had woken up. She was going to be all right. Eventually, Kushina was with Naruto the next day when she woke up for good with a groan. Naruto?" she whispered, holding her hands to her mouth. Then in the next moment she was clamped on her daughter like a vice. "I was so worried. What happened?" "All Kakashi said was that Iwa Ninja attacked and you defeated them. I'm so proud of you and—" She kept rambling on until a hand rested on her shoulder and she looked into the warm eyes of her husband. "Let her speak, Kushina." He said it gently, but a blush still came to her face. Especially since Kakashi was in the room looking on as well. "What happened, baby?" Naruto took a deep faltering breath. Kurama had been right. The pain that had eluded her in her mindscape came crashing down upon her, bringing heap loads guilt and fear along with it. "We were just on patrol, our mission almost done," she said softly, looking at her hands where they were twisting with each other nervously. "I was with Akio." Her pain warped the word. "And Kakashi-sensei was with Takaru. We were just about to head back when I sensed chakra signals from across the border. I hoped nothing came of it, but when we tried retreating, they ambushed us and took Akio hostage. They said they wanted me to come quietly and I was going to, I really was. But then they placed a seal on me. I don't think it worked properly though because I could still see and hear, even if it was muffled. That's how I saw them." Her eyes grew moist, but she made herself continue. They had to know. They killed him. Just like that. They said he could go if I didn't struggle? Why didn't they let him go? Kushina made to hug her, but Minato shook his head slightly. She had to get this out in one go. I lost it. I got so mad at them. I couldn't understand why they had to kill him. He was only 12. Now he's never going to prove that his Jikantedo can be mastered. She sniffled loudly but continued on still. Anyway, Kurama's chakra broke free and I killed them all. I was just so mad. Then I blacked out and woke up in my own mind. She hesitantly looked at them. The last couple of sentences had obviously confused them, so she took a deep breath. Kurama was there. Who is Kurama? Kakashi asked, even though he had a sinking feeling he knew. The Kyuubi no Kitsune, she said flatly. He's not evil like we always thought. He didn't want to attack the village. He was forced to by a masked Sharingan man. He just wanted to go home. Minato gaped at her, disbelieving. How do you know he wasn't lying? She glared at him, the sadness being replaced by anger. Because I saw it through my own eyes. He showed me his memories. I saw myself. Well, him. Get sealed by the third, get sealed into a baby, me. I felt his emotions as it was happening too. There's no way he could be lying. Minato held his hands up. Sorry, it's just a lot to believe. So what you're telling me is that he's friendly. Then why do you go animal whenever his chakra comes out? Naruto blushed lightly. Well, that's because I have really bad control over it. Right now, it only comes out when I feel intense emotion, rage, or am in mortal danger. The chakra naturally makes me more emotional, and right now it's just taking it way out of control. Kurama said that he would train me in how to be a great Jinchuriki. She added helpfully. So this won't be a problem for much longer. All three adults stared at her in shock. They had not expected this. Suddenly, the door slammed open and Tsunade stormed in, completely oblivious to the atmosphere, and squeezed her goddaughter. Ru, I can't believe you could do this to me. I was so worried, she wailed, smothering Naruto's face in her breasts. You were asleep for so long. Grandma Tsunade can't breathe, she managed after a moment, taking deep breaths the moment she was released. What's going on? Tsunade asked, suddenly much calmer and noticing the tense air. What's happened? And so they told her about Kurama, her eyes growing wider every second. Naruto suddenly felt extremely dizzy and swayed before pressing a hand to her temple. Naruto? What's happening? 4 alarmed voices chorused. It's okay, she panted. He said this would happen. It will pass in a moment. 6 seconds to be exact. Naruto jumped despite her dizziness. Kurama? How can you talk to me? She heard him laugh in her head. The link between us that I just made is allowing me to talk to you whenever. Cool, huh? Naruto scowled and told her family what had just happened. They weren't very pleased to say the least, probably worried about her being manipulated. Anyway, Naruto mentioned, where's Takaru? I'm hurt he isn't sitting here at my deathbed with me. She joked playfully. Her smile faded when she saw their expressions. What is it? She demanded, stress making her voice high-pitched. What haven't you told me? Minato finally stepped forward. Naruto. He began. Takaru is dead. He became depressed after Akio's death and chose death over living the life of a ninja. Naruto didn't need to know the true reasons behind Takaru's death, and none of the others made no move to add anything. They watched the girl's face as the blood drained out of it and her eyes dimmed. I see, was all she said. The pain in her eyes was obvious. Pain that was mirrored almost exactly in Kakashi's eyes. He had failed his students, all except the one in front of him right now. I'm really tired, she lied. Can I get some sleep please? They could all see it was a lie, but granted her wish to be alone. They would be there for her however, the moment that she wanted them to be. The next 2 years, and Naruto's 7th and 8th birthdays, seemed to come by very quickly after that. For the first week after the horrible mission, she was very withdrawn and quiet, but her family let her think everything through, and it paid off in the end. She could have gone down 2 paths that week. The first one is that she withdraws from the world permanently, never allowing herself to get close to anyone to save herself from feeling pain like that ever again. The second, and more desirable, path was that she become ever more determined than ever to protect her precious ones, and refused to allow a repeat of this ever happening again. She chose the second path. Kakashi was a seasoned shinobi and knew death was a depressing fact of a shinobi's life. So whilst the guilt and pain gnawed at his insides, adding to the pain and guilt left from so many deaths in his lifetime. He was a realist enough to know that he had to accept, make it part of him, and move on. Easier said than done. Naruto coming to him and requesting that he train her harder than ever was a huge help in him getting past it. It reminded him that he still had one student, his little sister even, that he would do anything to protect. He trained her hard in her taijutsu, stamina, and technique, every day pushing her to her limits. He even began to teach her the basics of kenjutsu, much to her deep pleasure, so that she could create her own style when she was older. She took the Chunin exam just after her 7th birthday and passed with flying colors, once more breaking the record for youngest Chunin. Her skills grew every single day, and whenever the white-haired man looked upon her, his pride only grew. While he was her official sensei, however, Naruto also received training from Tsunade, her parents, Jiraiya, and even Kurama. She was still unable to fully get hold of medical ninjutsu, but had reached the point where she could apply immediate first aid battlefield-type healing. The quick, rough immediate fix type. Whilst it wasn't ideal for healing major injuries, it would do for most of the minor ones. Jiraiya taught her several jutsu that could be used to remain hidden and for espionage missions, that she used in the rare pranks she would pull on people. Minato taught her all other types of ninjutsu that she practiced until she had it perfect. Kurama taught her about chakra control of all things and how to act in a fight emotionally. He trained her to control her emotions until he said she was perfect, and he didn't give praise lightly. Kushina taught her about the Uzumaki seals, and how to do fuinjutsu. Naruto could honestly say that it was one of her favorite subjects. Seals seemed to be able to do anything. And plus, if she had known how to counter the seal that held her while Akio was killed, she might have been able to prevent it. She would prevent it from happening ever again. When Naruto turned 9, everything changed once more. Jiraiya decided that he needed to take her on a training trip so that she could gain experience of other countries in the outside world, and after much discussion, her parents and sensei agreed. Tsunade was against it, but more for the fact that she didn't want Naruto exposed to Jiraiya's perverseness for the next 4 years. Seeing as it wasn't actually a valid reason, she had no way of stopping the trip. Naruto had a day to pack and say goodbye to her friends before they would leave. Of course, the first one she visited was the Uchihas. She would say goodbye to him, then the rest of her friends, few as they may be, and then she would pack. Sasuke, Itachi's 8-year-old brother and her substitute little brother as well, was out front when she arrived. "Hello, Susu," she greeted, using her personal nickname for him. He hated it. He glared at her, ignoring the blush that also stained his cheeks. My name is Sasuke, Ru. I'm not a baby anymore." Naruto pouted playfully and ran over to glomp him in an overwhelming hug. Despite that she was only a little over a year older than him, she saw him as her little brother, and treated him like it. "Ah, but it's how I show you that I care," she said mock sad. "But I guess it's fine if you don't want it anymore. I mean, I can't change how you feel after all, no matter how much it would hurt me." Thanks to Kurama's emotional training, she was able to force such dejection and sadness into her tone that he sighed and slumped slightly in defeat. "No, it's okay I guess. Just don't call me that in public, please." Naruto smiled widely and clutched him tighter for a second before letting go. "Thank you, Susu. I have to see your brother now, but we'll talk later." And with that, she ran away, laughing manically in her head the whole time, Kurama shaking his head in amusement. When she got to Itachi's room, she found him sitting on the floor reading a book. "You know, it's not nice to tease him like that," the 11-year-old Jonin said. "He's too young to understand that you're not serious." Naruto gaped at him, not understanding how he heard her, before shrugging it off. Itachi had his ways. "He's only really a year younger than me, and I like teasing him, Kai, it's fun." The boy sighed and gestured for her to take a seat. "Well, what have you come all the way over here to tell me? I assume it's important if it couldn't wait until our mission in 2 days. The blonde girl shifted uncomfortably. "See, that's just it. I'm not going on that mission anymore," she said quietly, her violet eyes downcast. Itachi looked up from his book in alarm. Ever since that horrible mission when she was 6, Naruto had been more serious than when she was younger, less blindly cheerful. Whilst this was probably a good thing as it made her more prepared in battle situations, he hated the thing that caused it. Itachi had overheard his parents talking about the real reason why Takaru had killed himself one night, and had felt such rage that he was glad the boy had taken his life rather than live to torment Naruto. Ever since that incident, however, the boy couldn't stand to see Naruto looking sad or down, and had made a commitment to cheer her up whenever he could. The sad look in her eyes right now tore at his heart and he wanted to take it away. "Hey, what is it?" he asked, flicking a lock of her beautiful blonde hair back. "What's up?" She still refused to look at him. "Naruto? Okay." Now he was getting confused. The girl took a deep breath and blurted it all out at once. "I'm going on a 4-year training trip with Jiraiya and we won't be visiting home or anything, and I'm going to miss everyone so much." His mind spun, trying to process the blurred information it had received. "You're going on a training trip with Jiraiya for 3 years? He checked. At her nod he sighed. He should have expected something like this. She needed to get experience of the outside world, but was too much of a target to do missions like he did. What he hadn't expected, however, was the painful tugging that occurred in his chest when he realized that he wouldn't see her for 4 years. How strange. He would probably have to go to the hospital and get that checked out. "It's okay, Ru," he said softly, pulling her chin up so she would look at him. "You don't have to be sad, okay? You're going to have a great time and get super strong, okay? Then when you get back, we can fight and we'll see who's stronger then, alright?" Her eyes widened and she nodded before throwing herself at him and wrapping her arms around his waist. "I'm going to miss you, Kai," she whispered into his shirt. Itachi hesitantly patted her on the back awkwardly until she let go. "You won't even have time to think of me. Now go, I'm sure you have lots of packing to do." He gave her a small smile, but for him, it was the equivalent to a large, toothy grin. "I'll see you in 3 years then." Her eyes dimmed for a moment before she straightened and nodded at him, her eyes dead serious. "I'll train really hard," she promised. "And don't slack off your training either. I want that fight when I get back, okay?" Itachi nodded. "I promise I won't." And with that, she was gone. Being the prodigy he was, Itachi didn't have many friends. The people his age were so much weaker than him, and the people his strength were so much older. Because of this, he tended to cling on to the few friends he had. Naruto was his best friend, and now he wouldn't be able to see her for 3 whole years. His last memory would be of her violet eyes staring him down seriously as she made him promise to train hard. And train hard he would. He wouldn't let her become stronger than him without a fight, literally. Putting down his book, Itachi left to see if Sasuke wanted to go train with him because, after all, there was no time like the present. The next day, Naruto left her village for the last time in 3 years. The next time she walked through those gates, she would be 13. Minato watched as his daughter left with his sensei, their hair blowing softly in the gentle breeze. Kushina was wrapped under one arm, Kakashi standing next to him, and Tsunade behind. All of them would miss her terribly, but knew this had to be done. Minato couldn't shake the feeling that everything would change when she returned.
That's all for now. If you want to see next part, then please like this video and subscribe my channel. Thank you.